My son looked me in the eye and told me not to come home for Thanksgiving because his wife thought I was an embarrassment. He said I didn't fit the image of their new life. So I sat alone in a diner, eating turkey with a group of complete strangers who saw a lonely old man and offered him a seat. My son didn't know that the man sitting across from me that night would become more of a son than he ever was. And he certainly didn't know that 6 years later, at his sister's wedding, he would be standing in a building owned by that stranger, begging me for a job. My name is Augustus Miller, and this is the story of how I turned an empty chair into an empire. Before I tell you how I rebuilt my life from the ashes of betrayal, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to love you the most. I looked at myself in the hallway mirror. At 74 years old, the man staring back at me was weathered, yes, but he wasn't broken. I adjusted the knot of my silk tie. It was a deep burgundy, the same one I had worn to the ribbon-cutting ceremony of the Skyline Tower 30 years ago. Back then, I was the lead structural engineer, the man who made sure the steel bones of the city didn't buckle under the weight of the sky. Today, I was just Gus, just the old man who lived in a paid-off bungalow on the south side of town. The house smelled incredible. It smelled of sage, rosemary, and roasted garlic. I had been up since 4 in the morning. I didn't sleep much these days. The silence in the house was too loud since my wife passed, so I filled the time with tasks. I had prepped the 20-pound turkey with the precision of a blueprint. I had brined it for 24 hours. I had trussed the legs exactly right. It wasn't just food. It was an offering. It was my way of saying to my son Trey and his wife Brittany that I was still here, that I was still trying, that I still wanted to be part of the family. I checked my watch. 11:30. I needed to leave in 10 minutes to arrive by noon. Brittany was particular about punctuality. She said arriving late was a sign of a chaotic mind. I didn't want to give her any ammunition. I walked into the kitchen and lifted the roasting pan. The bird was golden brown, glistening under the kitchen lights. It was heavy. My arthritis flared in my knuckles, a sharp, biting pain, but I ignored it. I was used to carrying heavy loads. Then, the phone rang. I smiled. It was probably Trey calling to see if I was on my way. Maybe he needed me to pick up ice. Maybe, just maybe, he was calling to say Happy Thanksgiving before I got there. I wiped my hands on a towel and picked up the receiver. "Hello, son," I said, my voice warm. "I am just packing the car. The bird looks beautiful this year." There was a pause on the other end, a hesitation. I knew that silence. It was the sound of bad news. "Dad," Trey said. His voice was tight, strained. "Yeah, Trey? Is everything okay? Is Zoe there yet?" "No, Dad, listen," Trey cut me off. He sounded like he was whispering, like he was hiding in a bathroom so his wife wouldn't hear him. "We have a bit of a situation here." I felt a cold drop in my stomach. "What happened? Is the oven broken?" "No, nothing like that," Trey said. He took a deep breath. "Look, Dad, Brittany invited some people over last minute, some investors. The chaotic market, you know? We need to secure funding for the new marketing firm. These are very particular people." I didn't understand. "Okay," I said slowly. "I can set an extra plate. The turkey is huge." "Dad, stop," Trey snapped. Then he lowered his voice again. "That is not the point. Look, Brittany thinks, we think, that it might be better if you didn't come today." The words hung in the air. The kitchen, which had felt warm and festive seconds ago, suddenly felt freezing. I gripped the phone. "Excuse me? It is just the vibe, Dad," Trey stammered. He was trying to rationalize cruelty with logic. I knew he was reciting lines Brittany had fed him. "These investors, they are new money. They are flashy. And you know how you are? You are old school. You talk about the old days. You wear those old suits. Brittany is worried it might send the wrong message. She wants to project an image of modern success. And, well, you don't really fit that aesthetic right now." I stood there, staring at the golden turkey. I looked down at my burgundy tie, the tie of a man who had built half this city, and my son was telling me I didn't fit the aesthetic. "So," I asked, my voice steady, though my hand was shaking, "you are uninviting me to Thanksgiving, 10 minutes before I walk out the door." "It is not uninviting, Dad," Trey said, sounding annoyed that I was making this difficult for him. "We can do something next week, just the two of us. Grab a burger or something. But today is business. You understand, right? You were a businessman. You know how it is. I was a businessman, yes, but I never sold my family for a deal. I understand, Trey, I said. I didn't yell, I didn't beg. I had too much dignity for that. Great, Trey exhaled, relieved. Thanks for being cool about it, Dad. Brittany was worried you would make a scene. I will call you next week. Happy Thanksgiving. The line went dead. I stood in the middle of my kitchen holding the phone. The dial tone buzzed in my ear like a fly. Happy Thanksgiving. I looked at the table. I had wrapped the cranberry sauce in a nice jar. I had baked the sweet potato pie with the recipe my wife used to use. It was all sitting there, ready to be shared, ready to be loved. And now, it was just garbage. I felt a sting in my eyes, but I refused to let the tears fall. I was Augustus Miller. I had dug trenches in the freezing rain. I had managed crews of 200 tough men. I wasn't going to cry because my son was a coward and his wife was a snob. But the anger was there. It was a low, simmering heat in my chest. I walked over to the turkey. I looked at it. 4 hours of basting. 4 hours of thinking about how happy my granddaughter Zoe would be when she tasted it. Zoe. They probably told her I was sick. They probably lied to her. I grabbed the roasting pan. The heat radiated through the oven mitts. I didn't put it in the car. I walked to the back door and kicked it open. The cold November air hit my face. I walked out to the large metal trash cans in the alleyway behind my garage. I lifted the lid with my elbow. For a second, I hesitated. It was a waste. It was a sin to waste food. But I couldn't keep it. I couldn't sit at my small kitchen table and eat this bird alone. Every bite would taste like rejection. Every bite would remind me that I wasn't good enough for the people I had raised. I tilted the pan. The 20-pound turkey slid out. It landed in the empty trash can with a heavy, wet thud, the sound of a heart breaking. I scraped the stuffing in after it. Then the pie. Then the cranberry sauce. I slammed the lid shut. The metal clang echoed in the empty alley. I stood there for a moment, breathing hard, watching the steam rise from the trash can in the cold air. My hands were empty now. My schedule was empty. My house was empty. I walked back inside. The smell of the food was still lingering in the air, mocking me. I couldn't stay here. The silence was going to suffocate me. If I sat down in my recliner now, I might never get up. I might just wither away into the old man they thought I was. I needed noise. I needed motion. I needed to be anywhere but this house that felt like a mausoleum of memories. I grabbed my car keys. I didn't take off my suit. I didn't loosen my tie. I put on my trench coat and my fedora. I walked out the front door and locked it behind me. I got into my sedan. It was a 10-year-old Lincoln, kept in pristine condition. Brittany hated this car. She called it a grandpa-mobile. She wanted me to sell it. I started the engine. The V8 rumbled to life, smooth and reliable. I didn't know where I was going. I just drove. I drove away from the quiet suburbs. I drove toward the city, toward the skyline I helped build. As I merged onto the highway, I saw cars full of families. I saw smiling faces in passenger seats holding casserole dishes. Everyone was going somewhere. Everyone had a place at a table. Except me. My son thought he had shamed me. He thought he had put me in my place. He thought I would go back inside, change into my pajamas, and watch football alone in the dark. He was wrong. I gripped the steering wheel. My knuckles were white. "You think I am old school, Trey?" I whispered to the empty car. "You think I am rusty?" I pressed the gas pedal. "I will show you old school." I exited the highway downtown. The streets were mostly empty, but a few places were open. I saw the neon sign of the Golden Fork, an upscale steakhouse that stayed open on holidays for tourists and strays. I pulled into the parking lot. I wasn't going to hide. I was going to eat the best meal of my life. And I was going to do it with my head held high. I stepped out of the car, straightened my coat, and walked toward the entrance. I didn't know it then, but as I reached for that door handle, I wasn't just walking into a restaurant. I was walking into the rest of my life. And Trey? He had just made the biggest mistake of his. The Golden Fork was the kind of establishment that prided itself on silence. The carpet was thick enough to swallow the sound of footsteps, the lighting was dim enough to hide the prices on the menu, and the air smelled of aged mahogany and truffle oil. It was a place designed to make you feel important, provided you looked the part. I walked through the heavy brass doors, shaking the November rain off my trench coat. The warmth of the room hit me instantly, a stark contrast to the freezing wind that had been biting at my face in the parking lot. For a moment, I just stood there, breathing in the scent of roasting meat and expensive wine. It was the smell of celebration. It was the smell of everything I was supposed to have at my son's house right now, but didn't. The hostess station was manned by a young woman with a clipboard and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She looked up at me, and her smile faltered. She scanned me from top to bottom. She saw the gray hair, the dark skin, the slightly wet coat, and the fedora I held in my hands. In her eyes, I wasn't Augustus Miller, the man who had engineered the structural integrity of the very floor she was standing on. In her eyes, I was just an old, lonely black man who had probably wandered in by mistake. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, her tone polite but guarding the entrance like a gatekeeper. "I would like a table for dinner," I said, my voice deep and steady. She looked down at her empty reservation book, then back up at me. "We are quite full this evening, sir. It is Thanksgiving, after all. Most of our tables are reserved for families." I looked past her shoulder. The restaurant was only half full. There were empty booths lining the windows, and several open tables in the center of the room. She wasn't protecting the reservations. She was protecting the aesthetic. She didn't want a solitary old man sitting in the middle of her dining room, ruining the vibe for the young couples and the wealthy tourists. "I see plenty of tables," I said. She bit her lip. "Well, I suppose I could squeeze you in. There is a small two-top near the kitchen service doors. It is a bit loud, but it is available." The table by the kitchen, the penalty box, the place they put you when they want you to eat fast and leave. I took a step closer to the podium. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply projected the authority I had used to command construction sites for 40 years. "I don't want the table by the kitchen, miss," I said. "I want that table." I pointed to a large, circular booth right in the center of the room, directly under the crystal chandelier. It was the best seat in the house. "That table is set for 4, sir," she stammered. "And I have the appetite of 4 men," I replied. I walked past her before she could object again. I hung my coat on the rack myself and sat down in the plush leather booth. I looked up at the ceiling. The hostess watched me nervously, probably wondering if she should call security. She had no idea that I was checking the load-bearing beams. I remembered drawing the blueprints for this ceiling 30 years ago. I remembered arguing with the contractor about the reinforced steel needed to support that massive chandelier. I knew the bones of this building better than the owner did. I knew that the third pillar from the left was slightly thicker than the others to account for wind shear. I had poured my sweat into the foundation of this city, yet here I was, fighting for the right to eat a steak in it. A waiter appeared, looking flustered. He handed me a menu without making eye contact. "Just water to start?" he asked, his pen hovering over his pad, clearly expecting me to order the cheapest burger and tap water. I didn't open the menu. I knew what I wanted. "I will have the tomahawk ribeye, medium rare," I said, "and I want a bottle of the Camus Special Selection, the 2015 vintage, if you still have it in the cellar." The waiter paused. He looked at me, then at the empty table, then back at me. The tomahawk was a $150 steak. The wine was $300. "The bottle, sir, or a glass?" "The bottle," I said, "and bring 2 glasses." "2 glasses?" he asked, confused. "Is someone joining you?" I looked at the empty seat across from me, the seat where my son Trey should have been, the seat where my granddaughter Zoe should have been laughing and stealing my fries. "No," I said softly. "The second glass is for the ghost of the man I used to be. Just bring it." He scurried away, his attitude adjusting instantly from dismissal to deference. Money has a way of changing people's manners. It was a sad truth I had learned a long time ago. I sat there in the silence, listening to the clinking of silverware and the murmur of conversations around me. To my left, a young couple was holding hands, ignoring their food. To my right, a business meeting was taking place, men in suits discussing stocks. It all felt so sterile, so cold. But then, a noise cut through the polite atmosphere. It was a laugh. A loud, booming, unashamed laugh that came from a large table in the corner. I turned my head. It was a table of 8, a family. They were Latino, spanning 3 generations. There was an older woman with a stern face but kind eyes, probably the matriarch. There were 3 children running around the table with toys, and in the center of it all was a man who looked to be about 40. He was wearing a dress shirt that was tight around the shoulders, the kind of build you get from lifting lumber, not weights in a gym. His hands, even from this distance, looked rough and calloused. He was laughing at something his wife, a beautiful woman with tired eyes, had whispered to him. They were loud. They were chaotic. They were passing plates of food across the table, spilling sauce, arguing about who ate the last shrimp. The waiter serving them looked annoyed, but they didn't care. They were happy. They had the one thing money couldn't buy, and the one thing my son had thrown away. They had warmth. I watched them. I couldn't help it. I watched the way the man cut meat for his youngest daughter. I watched the way he poured wine for his mother. It was like watching a movie of the life I used to have. My wine arrived. The waiter poured a small amount for me to taste. I waved him away. It was fine. I filled my glass to the brim. I poured a splash into the empty glass opposite me. "Happy Thanksgiving, Gus," I whispered to myself. I took a sip. The wine was excellent. It tasted like blackberries and oak, but it went down hard, catching in my throat like a stone. "Hey, Jefe!" The voice startled me. It was loud and directed right at my booth. I turned. The man from the loud table was standing there. He was holding a bottle of tequila in one hand and a half-eaten bread roll in the other. He was looking right at me. "Me?" I asked, pointing to my chest. "Yeah, you," the man said, grinning. He had a gold tooth that flashed under the chandelier. "You look like you were drinking the good stuff, but you look way too serious for a holiday." He walked over to my table. He didn't ask for permission. He just leaned his hip against the leather booth. Up close, I could smell the cologne and the faint scent of sawdust. He smelled like a job site. "My name is Mateo," he said, extending a hand that felt like sandpaper. "And that over there is my circus." He pointed to his table, where the kids were now building a tower out of sugar packets. I shook his hand. His grip was firm, honest. "Augustus," I said. "Gus." "Nice to meet you, Gus," Mateo said. He looked at the empty glass across from me. He looked at the expensive wine. He looked at my face. He didn't look at me with pity. He didn't give me the sad eyes the hostess had given me. He looked at me with recognition. He saw a man who was holding it together by a thread. "You waiting for someone, Gus?" Mateo asked. "I was," I said, taking another sip of wine. But plans changed. My son. He had a different aesthetic in mind for the evening. Mateo nodded slowly. He understood. He didn't ask for details. He didn't pry. He just nodded like a man who knew what it felt like to be let down. "Aesthetic, huh?" Mateo chuckled. "That is a fancy word for being an idiot." He looked back at his table. His wife was waving at him to sit down. "Listen, Gus," Mateo said, turning back to me. "My mother-in-law, she made tamales. We brought them in her purse. Don't tell the waiter. But they are better than anything on this menu, and we have an empty chair. My brother was supposed to come, but his flight got canceled." He gestured with the tequila bottle. "We are loud. My kids are monsters, and my wife is going to ask you a million questions. But the tequila is good, and nobody eats alone on Thanksgiving. Not on my watch." I looked at him. I looked at his chaotic, messy, beautiful table. Then I looked at my perfect, solitary steak that the waiter was just placing in front of me. "I shouldn't intrude," I said, my pride flaring up one last time. "I have a lot of food coming." "Bring the steak," Mateo said to the waiter. "Bring the wine. Move it all over to table 6. The waiter looked horrified. "Sir, we can't just move tables. Do I look like I care?" Mateo laughed. He clapped a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Come on, Gus. You look like a man who knows how to tell a story. And I am tired of listening to my mother-in-law talk about her gallbladder. You would be saving me." He wasn't offering me charity. He was offering me a trade, my company for his sanctuary. I looked at the empty glass opposite me one last time. The ghost of the man I used to be was sitting there, telling me to stay, telling me to be dignified, telling me to suffer in silence. But I was tired of listening to ghosts. I stood up. I grabbed my bottle of Camus. "Lead the way, Mateo," I said. Mateo grinned. He grabbed my tomahawk steak right off the waiter's tray with his bare hand, holding it by the bone like a club. "That is the spirit, Pops," he shouted. "Hey, Maria, make room. We got a guest." As I walked across the restaurant, following this stranger toward the noise and the laughter, I felt the cold knot in my chest loosen just a fraction. I didn't know who these people were. I didn't know that the man carrying my steak would one day be the partner I trusted with my life. All I knew was that for the first time that day, someone wanted me at their table, and that was enough. Table 6 was not just a table. It was a sovereign nation with its own laws, its own volume level, and its own gravitational pull. As I followed Matteo across the hushed dining room of the Golden Fork, I felt like I was crossing a border from a cold, sterile country into a land of vibrant, messy life. The other diners watched us with a mixture of annoyance and curiosity. They saw a large man in a construction shirt leading an older black man in a three-piece suit, carrying a bottle of wine worth more than a car payment. We were an odd pair, but as I slid into the booth next to Matteo, squeezing in beside a high chair that smelled faintly of apple juice, I didn't care about the optics. "This is Gus," Matteo announced to the table, his voice booming over the clatter of silverware. He was eating alone. Now he is eating with us. Don't scare him away. The woman sitting opposite me, Maria, looked up from wiping tomato sauce off a toddler's face. She had dark circles under her eyes, the kind that come from raising 3 children and managing a husband like Matteo. But her smile was genuine. She didn't look at my suit or my age. She looked at my eyes. "Welcome, Gus," she said, her voice warm. "I am sorry about the noise. We try to be civilized, but genetics are against us." She gestured to the 3 children. There was a teenage girl tapping furiously on her phone, a boy of about 8 who was currently trying to balance a spoon on his nose, and the toddler in the high chair who was staring at me with wide, unblinking eyes. And then, at the end of the table, sat an older woman with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. She was staring at me with the scrutiny of a judge. "This is Abuela," Matteo said, pointing to the older woman. "She doesn't speak much English, but she understands everything, especially if you were talking about her cooking." Abuela narrowed her eyes. She reached into her oversized handbag, which was sitting on the floor. I watched, fascinated, as she pulled out a Tupperware container wrapped in aluminum foil. She popped the lid. Steam rose up, carrying the scent of corn masa and chili. The waiter arrived with my tomahawk steak and the bottle of Camus. He looked terrified as he tried to find a space for the massive platter amidst the chaos of sippy cups, bread baskets, and scattered crayons. "Just put it there," Matteo said, shoving a bread basket aside. The waiter deposited the steak and fled. Matteo poured the wine into 2 glasses. He didn't swirl it. He didn't sniff the cork. He just filled the glasses to the brim like it was lemonade. "Salud," he said, clinking his glass against mine hard enough that I worried for the crystal. "Salud," I replied. I took a sip. The wine was complex, elegant, and structured. Everything this table was not. "Eat," the old woman commanded suddenly. She pointed a fork at me. "You are too thin." She reached into the Tupperware and used her fork to spear a tamale. Without asking, she plopped it right on top of my $150 steak. "Abuela," Maria scolded. "You can't put a tamale on a tomahawk ribeye." "Why not?" Abuela shrugged. "Meat is meat." I looked at the plate. The juxtaposition was absurd. A Michelin star steak garnished with a homemade tamale smuggled in a purse. I picked up my knife and fork. I cut a piece of the tamale first. I took a bite. It was hot, spicy, and tasted like comfort. It tasted like hands that had worked hard to feed people they loved. "It is delicious, ma'am," I said. "Thank you." Abuela nodded, satisfied. She went back to eating her soup. For the next 20 minutes, I was swept up in the current of the Rivera family. I learned that Leo, the 8-year-old, wanted to be an astronaut but was afraid of heights. I learned that Sophia, the teenager, was mad because she couldn't go to a concert. I learned that Matteo ran a small construction crew and was currently fighting with the city over permits for a renovation job. They didn't ask me why I was alone. They didn't ask about my son. They just accepted me as a temporary fixture in their universe. It was a relief. I didn't have to be the retired architect. I didn't have to be the disappointed father. I was just Gus, the guy eating the steak. Then a crisis struck. Leo, the aspiring astronaut, let out a wail of despair. He had been playing with a toy dump truck, a die-cast metal replica that looked heavy and expensive. He had been ramming it into the salt shaker, and suddenly, the bed of the truck had snapped off its hinge. "It broke," Leo cried, tears instantly springing to his eyes. "Daddy, fix it!" Matteo sighed. He wiped his mouth with a napkin and grabbed the truck. "Let me see, champ," Matteo said. He examined the toy. The metal pin that held the bed to the chassis had popped out of its housing and bent slightly. Matteo tried to jam it back in with his thick thumbs. He grunted, applying brute force. "It is stuck," Matteo muttered. "The metal is bent. I need pliers." He tried to use his fork to pry it open, but the fork tines just bent. Leo started crying harder. The sound cut through the restaurant, drawing angry glares from the nearby tables. Matteo looked frustrated. He was a man who built houses, but his hands were too big, too rough for this delicate surgery. "Give it here," I said quietly. Matteo looked at me. "You want to give it a shot, Pops? It is jammed tight." I held out my hand. I took the truck. I put on my reading glasses. I looked at the mechanism. It wasn't just bent, the tension spring had slipped. Force wouldn't fix it. It needed leverage. I looked at the table. I needed a fulcrum. I picked up the heavy silver butter knife. It had a flat, sturdy handle. I placed the truck on the edge of the table. I used the knife handle not to pry, but to create a counter-pressure against the chassis. I lined up the bent pin with the hole. "I need a napkin," I said. Maria handed me one. I folded it over the head of the pin to protect the paint. I applied pressure. Not a lot, just a steady, calculated force at a 45-degree angle. I visualized the stress point of the metal. I knew exactly how much yield it had before it would snap. Pop. The pin slid back to place with a satisfying click. The bed of the truck swung freely up and down. I checked the tension spring. I used the tip of the knife to guide it back into its groove. "Good as new," I said. I handed the truck back to Leo. He stopped crying instantly. He spun the wheels. He lifted the bed. He looked at me with awe. "Whoa," Leo whispered. "You are a wizard." I wiped the grease from the toy off my hands with the napkin. Matteo was staring at me. He looked at the truck, then at the butter knife, then at me. He saw the way I held the tool. He saw the way I analyzed the problem before I touched it. "You are not just a suit, are you, Gus?" Matteo asked, his voice lower, more serious. I took a sip of wine. "No, not just a suit." "You a mechanic?" he asked. "An engineer?" I smiled. I thought about the skyscrapers I had designed. I thought about the bridges. I thought about the awards sitting in boxes in my basement. "I used to stack a few bricks," I said simply, "a long time ago." Matteo studied me. He was a contractor. He knew the difference between a man who sat behind a desk pushing paper and a man who understood how things were put together. He saw the calluses on my hands that 40 years of drafting pencils and site inspections had left behind. "You got good hands, Gus," Matteo said. "Respect." He poured more tequila into a small glass he had procured from the waiter. "To stacking bricks," Matteo said, raising his glass. "To building things that last," I replied, clinking my wine glass against his shot glass. We drank. The tequila burned, but it was a good burn. It felt real. Just then, my phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. The vibration felt like an intrusion, a reminder of the world outside this warm, chaotic bubble. I pulled it out. It was a text message from Trey. I hesitated. I didn't want to look. I wanted to stay here, in the land of broken toys and tamales. But old habits die hard. I opened the message. It was a photo, a selfie. It showed Trey and Brittany sitting at their dining room table. The lighting was perfect. The table setting was exquisite, straight out of a magazine. There were crystal glasses and silver candlesticks. Sitting across from them were an older couple, white, dressed in expensive clothes, the investors. Everyone was smiling. It was a picture of success, a picture of the aesthetic Trey wanted so badly. And then I read the caption. "Miss you, Dad. The turkey turned out great. So sorry you were down with the flu and couldn't make it. Get some rest. We love you." The flu. He had lied to them. He had told the investors, and probably himself, that I was sick. He couldn't even own his cruelty. He had to wrap it in a lie to make himself look like the concerned son. He had erased me from the evening, and then he had rewritten the script to make himself the hero. I looked at the photo again. Trey's smile looked tight. Brittany looked triumphant. I looked up at Matteo. He was wrestling with his son, trying to steal a French fry. He was laughing. His family wasn't perfect. They were loud, they were messy, and they were probably barely making rent. But they were real. I looked back at the phone, at the lie glowing on the screen. I didn't feel the sting of rejection anymore. That had burned off in the cold alleyway. Now, I just felt a cold, hard clarity. My son didn't want a father. He wanted a prop. And when the prop didn't fit the scene, he discarded it. I didn't type a reply. I didn't send an angry emoji. I didn't ask why he lied. I pressed the power button on the side of the phone. I held it down. The screen asked me to confirm shutdown. I swiped right. The screen went black. The glowing image of my son's fake happiness vanished, leaving only the reflection of my own face in the dark glass. "Everything okay, Gus?" Mateo asked, noticing my change in demeanor. I slipped the dead phone into my pocket. "Better than okay, Mateo," I said. I just took out the trash. I picked up the bottle of Camus. "Who wants more wine?" I asked. Abuela held out her glass. I poured. And for the first time in 6 years, I truly enjoyed my Thanksgiving dinner. 6 months is a long time to wait for a phone call that never comes. After that Thanksgiving night at the restaurant, I went back to my silent house and waited. I wasn't waiting for an apology, because I knew my son well enough to know he didn't think he had done anything wrong. I was waiting for a sign of conscience, a text message, a voicemail, anything that proved the boy I raised hadn't been completely consumed by the stranger he had become. But the phone sat on the hallway table, gathering dust. The winter turned into spring. The snow melted, and the flowers my wife had planted years ago began to push through the soil. I spent my days at the construction site with Mateo, finding a new purpose in the noise and the concrete. But at night, the silence of my home was still heavy. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon in May, the silence broke. I was in the living room, reading a book on sustainable urban architecture, when I heard the distinct purr of a high-performance engine in my driveway. I looked out the window. It was a Porsche Cayenne, shiny, black, and looking completely out of place next to my 10-year-old Lincoln and the cracked pavement of my driveway. Trey had come home. I didn't rush to the door. I placed my bookmark carefully. I took off my reading glasses. I walked to the entrance with the measured pace of a man who knows that trouble has just parked on his lawn. When I opened the door, Trey was already halfway up the walk. He looked thinner than I remembered, his suit a little too tight, his smile a little too forced. Behind him was Brittany. She was wearing heels that were sinking into the soft grass of my front lawn, and she looked at my house the way a health inspector looks at a rat infestation. "Hey, Dad," Trey said, opening his arms for a hug, as if 6 months of silence hadn't just happened. "Long time no see." I let him hug me. His embrace felt light, insubstantial. He smelled of expensive cologne and anxiety. "Hello, son," I said. "Hello, Brittany." Brittany didn't hug me. She stopped at the threshold of the door. She took a small, sharp breath in, and then, instinctively, she raised her hand to cover her nose and mouth. It was subtle. If you weren't looking for it, you might have thought she was just adjusting her lipstick. But I was looking. "Does it smell in here?" she asked, her voice muffled behind her manicured hand. "It smells damp, like old paper." "It smells like a home, Brittany," I said, stepping aside to let them in. "It smells like oak floors and books." She walked in, stepping gingerly on the Persian rug in the hallway. She kept her arms pulled tight to her body, terrified of brushing against the walls. "We can't stay long, Dad," Trey said, ushering her into the living room. "We have a dinner reservation downtown, but we wanted to stop by, check on you, see how you were doing." He sat down on the leather armchair, the one I had sat in to read him bedtime stories 30 years ago. Brittany refused to sit. She stood by the window, looking out at the backyard with a critical eye. "The grass is getting long, Gus," she said. She never called me Dad. It was always Gus. "You really should hire a service. It looks messy. It brings down the property value of the whole street." "I mow it myself," I said. "I like the exercise." Brittany scoffed. "It shows." Trey cleared his throat. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He had that look in his eyes, the look of a salesman preparing to pitch a product he knew was defective. "So, Dad," Trey started, "we were talking about you the other night. We are worried." "Worried?" I repeated. "You haven't called in 6 months, Trey. I didn't know you were thinking about me at all." Trey flinched. Brittany turned from the window, her eyes narrowing. "We have been busy, Gus," she snapped. "Building a future, something you should understand. But that is why we are here. We think this house is too much for you. It is old. It is falling apart. The plumbing is probably full of lead. It is not safe for a man of your age." "My plumbing is copper," I said calmly. I installed it myself in 1982, and the foundation is reinforced concrete. This house will stand long after your condo crumbles, Brittany. Trey laughed nervously. Okay, Dad, sure, but look at it. It is dark. It is lonely. Brittany and I found this amazing place. It is a senior living community. Sunny meadows. It is high-end, Dad. They have a golf course. They have a cafeteria. You would be with people your own age. I looked at them. They hadn't come to visit. They had come to evict me. And what happens to this house? I asked. We sell it, Brittany said quickly. She walked over to Trey and put a hand on his shoulder. The market is hot right now, Gus. Even for a teardown like this, we could get a good price for the land. And the money? I asked. That is the best part, Dad, Trey said, his eyes lighting up. You sell the house, you pay for the first year at Sunny Meadows, and the rest, well, the rest we can invest. Brittany found this incredible opportunity. It is a tech startup. High risk, high reward. If we put the capital in now, we could triple it in 2 years. We would manage it for you, of course, to make sure you were taken care of. I sat back in my chair. The picture was complete. They didn't want me to have friends. They didn't want me to be safe. They wanted my equity. They wanted to liquidate my life to fund their gambling. They looked at the walls that held 40 years of memories and saw only dollar signs. I looked at my son. I remembered teaching him to ride a bike in this driveway. I remembered holding his mother in this room when she took her last breath. You want me to sell my home? I said slowly. To give you the money, so you can put me in a home. It is an investment, Dad, Trey insisted. It is smart. You are sitting on dead capital. We want to make it work for you. Brittany walked over to me. She forced a smile. It was a terrifying expression, stretching her skin tight over her cheekbones. She reached out and touched my shoulder. Her hand rested on my old cardigan. It is for your own good, Gus, she said. Her voice was sickly sweet. We just want you to be comfortable. You shouldn't be living like this. It is sad. I looked at her hand on my shoulder. I felt the weight of it. Then she pulled away. And as she pulled her hand back, I saw it. She reached into her purse. She pulled out a small bottle of hand sanitizer and a tissue. She turned slightly away from me, thinking I wouldn't notice. She squirted the gel onto the palm that had just touched me. She wiped it vigorously, as if she had just touched a piece of rotting meat. She crumpled the tissue and shoved it into her pocket. The room went cold. Whatever tiny flicker of hope I had held for my son and his wife died in that moment. It wasn't just greed. It was disgust. They were repulsed by me. They were repulsed by my age, by my house, by my very existence. To them, I was something dirty that needed to be sanitized and put away in a drawer. I looked at Trey. He had seen it too. He had seen his wife wipe my touch off her skin. And he said nothing. He just looked at his watch. So, what do you think, Dad? Trey asked. Can we call the realtor? We have a friend who can list it quietly. I stood up. My knees popped, but I stood straight. I walked over to my desk in the corner. I opened the drawer and pulled out my checkbook. Trey's eyes widened. He nudged Brittany. They thought they had won. They thought the old man was finally giving in. I uncapped my pen. How much is the buy-in for this investment? I asked. 50,000, Trey said quickly. But 100 would get us a board seat, I wrote. My pen scratched against the paper. I tore the check out. I walked back to them. Here, I said. Trey grabbed it. His hands were shaking. He looked at the number. His face fell. $5,000? Trey asked, looking up at me. Dad, this is nothing. We need 50. Take it, I said. But Dad, the house. The house is not for sale, I said. My voice was low, devoid of anger, devoid of love. It was just a fact. This house is my home, and I will die in this house. Brittany glared at the check. You are being selfish, Gus. We are trying to help you. No, I said. You are trying to bury me before I am dead. I walked to the front door and opened it. The afternoon sun spilled into the hallway, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. $5,000 is a lot of money, Trey, I said. It is enough for a nice dinner. It is enough to fix that dent I saw on the bumper of your Porsche. Trey looked at me, shocked. Take the money, son, I said, and go. But Dad. Go, I repeated. Brittany grabbed Trey's arm. Come on, Trey. He is senile. He doesn't understand business. Let's go. We are wasting our time. She marched past me, holding her breath again as she crossed the threshold. She didn't say goodbye. Trey lingered for a second. He looked at the check in his hand, then at me. "You are making a mistake, Dad," he said. "You are going to end up alone in this big, empty house. And when you get sick, who is going to take care of you? Not us. We gave you a chance." I looked at him. I looked at the man who shared my DNA, but none of my spirit. "I am not alone, Trey," I said, "and I have never been more taken care of than I am right now." He scoffed, shook his head, and walked out to his car. I watched them drive away. I watched the black Porsche disappear down the street, taking with it the last illusions of my fatherhood. I closed the door. I locked it. I walked back into the living room. I looked at the spot where Brittany had stood. I could still smell her perfume, sharp and chemical, masking the smell of my old books. I went to the kitchen and got a bucket of soapy water and a rag. I got down on my knees. My joints screamed, but I didn't care. I scrubbed the floor where she had walked. I scrubbed the rug where she had stepped. I scrubbed until the smell of her was gone, and the house smelled like lemon and pine again. They thought I was an ATM. They thought I was a resource to be mined. They didn't know that the mine was closed. I stood up, wringing out the rag. My hands were trembling, not from age, but from adrenaline. I went to the phone. I dialed a number I had memorized over the last 6 months. "Mateo," I said when he answered. "Hey, Gus!" Mateo's voice was loud, cheerful. He was probably on a job site. "What's shaking? I need you to come over," I said. "Bring the truck." "What's wrong? You okay?" "I am fine," I said. "But I have some money, a lot of money, and I am tired of letting it sit in the bank waiting for people who hate me to inherit it." Mateo paused. "What are you talking about, Gus?" "I am talking about that project you showed me," I said. "The one the bank turned down." "The high-rise?" Mateo laughed. "That is a pipe dream, Gus. We need millions." "I know," I said. "I am looking at my portfolio right now, Mateo." I took a deep breath. "Let's build it." I hung up the phone. I looked around my quiet house. It wasn't a tomb anymore. It was a command center. My son wanted me to go into the dark. He wanted me to fade away. I walked to the window and opened the curtains wide. I wasn't going anywhere. The smell of wet concrete is better than any cologne in the world. To some people, a construction site is just noise and dust. But to me, it is a symphony. The rhythm of the jackhammers, the whine of the circular saws, the shouting of men coordinating a lift. It is the sound of progress. It is the sound of life being built from the ground up. I parked my old Lincoln a block away from the site. I didn't want to get in the way of the delivery trucks. I put on my hard hat. It was an old one, scratched and faded, with a sticker from a project I managed in 1995 still peeling off the side. I walked onto the lot. This wasn't a skyscraper. It was a mid-sized commercial renovation in the warehouse district, an old brick factory that was being converted into lofts. It was the kind of job that could make a small contractor's career or break him completely. I found Mateo sitting on a stack of drywall sheets near the temporary office trailer. He wasn't barking orders. He wasn't checking measurements. He was sitting with his head in his hands, staring at the muddy ground. His shoulders, usually broad and confident, were slumped. He looked like a man who was trying to hold up a collapsing roof with his bare hands. I walked up to him. He didn't hear me approach over the noise of the generator. "Rough morning, Mateo?" I asked. He jumped a little. He looked up. His eyes were red. He looked exhausted. "Gus," he said, forcing a smile that looked painful. "What are you doing here? You come to inspect the safety rails again?" "I came to bring you lunch," I said, holding up a paper bag from the deli, "and to ask why the steel delivery hasn't arrived. I saw the schedule. The beam should have been here at 8 a.m. Mateo sighed. He took off his hard hat and ran a hand through his dusty hair. "There is no steel coming, Gus." "Why not?" "Because the bank called at 9, Mateo said, his voice flat. "They pulled the financing. They said the risk profile changed. They said I don't have enough liquidity to cover the cost overruns." He kicked a loose stone. "It is over, Gus. I can't pay the steel supplier. If I don't get the steel up by Friday, I miss the inspection. If I miss the inspection, the developer triggers the penalty clause. I lose the contract. I lose the bond. I lose everything." He looked at the half-finished building. "I put my house up as collateral, Gus. Maria doesn't know yet. If this job goes south, we lose the house. We lose the trucks. We are out on the street. I looked at him. I saw the terror in his eyes. It was the same terror I had felt 40 years ago when I started my first company. But beneath the terror, I saw something else. I saw shame. He wasn't afraid of being poor. He was afraid of failing his family. He was afraid of going home to that loud, chaotic, beautiful dinner table and telling them he had let them down. My son, Trey, wanted money to gamble on a tech startup so he could buy a bigger boat. Mateo wanted money to keep a roof over his children's heads. I didn't say anything. I just nodded. "Come inside the trailer," I said. Mateo looked confused. "Gus, there is no point. I have to send the guys home. Come inside," I repeated. We walked into the small, cramped office trailer. It smelled of stale coffee and blueprints. I cleared off a space on the drafting table, pushing aside a stack of unpaid invoices. I reached into my coat pocket. I didn't pull out a checkbook. Not yet. I pulled out a long cardboard tube. I uncapped it and slid out a roll of large blue-lined paper. I spread it out on the table, weighting down the corners with a stapler and a coffee mug. Mateo looked at it. It was a set of blueprints. But they weren't the ones the architect had sent over. These were hand-drawn. The lines were precise, sharp, drawn with the steady hand of a master. There were notes in the margins in red ink, calculations of load variance and stress factors. "What is this?" Mateo asked. "This is how you save the project," I said. I pointed to the main support columns. "Your architect is an idiot, Mateo. He has you using W14 steel beams for the internal framing. That is overkill for a structure of this height. It is safe, yes, but it is expensive and heavy." I tapped the drawing. I recalculated the load. If you switch to a hollow structural section grid and reinforce the concrete core here, here, and here, you maintain the same structural integrity rating, but you reduce the steel weight by 40%. Mateo squinted at the drawing. He traced the lines with his finger. His contractor brain started to work. "Hollow sections are cheaper," he muttered, "and faster to install. We wouldn't need the heavy crane. We could use the boom lift." "Exactly," I said. I also redesigned the HVAC ducting route. The original plan had it going through the main load-bearing wall, which meant expensive headers. I moved it to the chaseway. That saves you 3 weeks of labor and $20,000 in materials. Mateo looked up at me. His mouth was slightly open. "Gus," he whispered, This cuts the budget by 30%, I finished for him. Maybe 35 if you negotiate hard with the concrete guys. Mateo looked back at the drawing. He looked at it like it was a treasure map. "This is genius, Gus. This makes the numbers work. Even with the penalty, this puts us in the black." He paused. The light faded from his eyes. "But it doesn't matter," he said quietly. "The bank pulled the loan. Even if it is cheaper, I can't buy the materials to start. I have zero cash flow. I can't buy the hollow sections. I can't pay the crew for this week." I reached into my pocket again. This time, I pulled out the checkbook. The same checkbook I had used to write a $5,000 check for my ungrateful son just a week ago. I opened it. I picked up a pen. I didn't hesitate. I didn't tremble. I thought about Brittany wiping her hand after touching me. I thought about Trey checking his watch while I tried to save my home. And then I thought about Mateo. I thought about how he fixed his son's toy. I thought about the tamale on my steak. I thought about how he called me Pops, not to mock me, but because he respected me. I wrote the date. I wrote the name. Mateo Rivera Construction. And then I wrote the number. $200,000. It was a significant chunk of my liquid savings. It was the money I had set aside for a rainy day. Well, it was storming outside. I tore the check out and placed it on top of the blueprints. Mateo stared at it. He blinked. He rubbed his eyes and looked again. "Gus," he choked out. "What? Is this a joke?" "It is not a joke," I said. "It is an investment." "I can't take this," Mateo said, stepping back as if the check were radioactive. "This is too much. Gus, this is your retirement. I can't gamble with your life." "You are not gambling," I said sternly. "I don't gamble. I calculate odds, and I am betting on you." I walked around the table and stood face to face with him. But this is not a gift, Matteo. I am not your fairy godmother. This is business. I held up 3 fingers. 3 conditions, I said. Matteo looked at me, tears streaming down his dusty face. Anything, Gus, anything. Condition 1, I said. This buys me 49% of the company. You keep 51. You are the majority shareholder. It is your name on the door. You are the face. I am just the money and the math. Done, Matteo said instantly. Condition 2, I continued. I have veto power on all technical decisions. If I say a beam is too small, we change it. If I say a schedule is too tight, we extend it. I don't care about profit margins if the building falls down. We build it right, or we don't build it at all. Done, Matteo said. And condition 3, I said, my voice dropping lower. Nobody knows. Matteo wiped his face with his sleeve. What do you mean? I mean, nobody knows I am your partner, I said. Not the clients, not the suppliers, and especially not my family. To the world, I am just a retired old man who likes to hang around construction sites because he is bored. I am a consultant, an advisor, nothing more. But why? Matteo asked. You should get credit. You saved us. I don't want credit, I said. I want quiet. I want to build things without the politics. I want to work without my son asking for a handout. And I want to see if we can build an empire from the shadows. I looked at the check. Do we have a deal, partner? Matteo looked at the check, then at the blueprints, then at me. He took a deep breath. He reached out his hand. We have a deal, Pops. I shook his hand. It was rough, calloused, and honest. Good, I said. Now pick up the phone. Call the steel supplier. Tell them we are switching to hollow sections, and we are paying cash on delivery. And tell the crew to get back to work. We have a schedule to keep. Matteo grabbed the phone. His hands were shaking, but his voice was strong when he started barking orders. I walked out of the trailer. I stood on the edge of the site, listening to the generator hum. I had just given away my safety net. I had just tied my financial future to a man I had met in a restaurant 6 months ago. My son would call me crazy. My daughter-in-law would call me senile. But as I watched Matteo running toward the foreman, waving the blueprints in the air like a flag of victory, I knew the truth. I hadn't lost money. I had just bought my life back. I smiled. M&G Construction. It had a nice ring to it. I put my hard hat back on. It was time to get to work. They say that the best place to hide a diamond is in a pile of coal. For the next 5 years, I became a master of camouflage. To the world, and especially to my son Trey and his wife Brittany, I was Augustus Miller, the retired relic. I was the old man who wore cardigans with loose threads and drove a Lincoln that had seen better decades. I was the man they invited over once a month out of obligation, usually when they needed someone to sign for a package or wait for a cable guy because they were too important to leave work. I played the part perfectly. I sat on their beige sofa, drinking instant coffee because Brittany didn't want to waste the expensive pods on me. I listened to Trey brag about his marketing campaigns, about how he was crushing it, even though I could see the stress lines around his eyes, and the overdue notices he quickly shuffled under piles of magazines. They treated me like furniture, old, sturdy, but ultimately out-of-style furniture that they were waiting to donate. But they didn't know about my afternoons. Every morning at 10 o'clock, I would leave my house. I would tell my neighbors I was going to the library or the park to feed the pigeons. I would drive my old Lincoln to a private garage in the industrial district, a garage that M&G Construction rented under a shell company. Inside that garage was my phone booth. It was where Clark Kent became Superman. I would hang up my beige cardigan. I would take off my scuffed orthopedic shoes, and I would open my locker. Inside hung my Italian wool suits, the ones I used to wear in the 80s, but had tailored to fit my older frame. I would put on my cufflinks. I would tie my silk tie, and I would slide my feet into polished Oxfords that clicked with authority against the concrete floor. Then, I would walk through the back door of the adjoining office trailer. "Good afternoon, Mr. Miller." The greeting came from Sarah, our office manager. She didn't look at me with pity. She looked at me with expectation. She handed me a stack of reports and a fresh cup of black coffee, brewed exactly how I liked it. "Is the concrete pour on schedule for the West Side project?" I would ask, looking at the monitors on the wall. "Ahead of schedule, sir," she would reply. "Matteo is on site now. He needs your approval on the window glazing specs." I would sit at my desk. It wasn't a corner office in a skyscraper. It was a metal desk in a double-wide trailer. But from this desk, I controlled the skyline. M&G Construction was no longer a struggling startup. With my capital and Mateo's hustle, we had become the silent giants of the city. We were building luxury condos, renovating historic theaters, and bidding on municipal infrastructure. Mateo was the face. He was the one shaking hands at charity galas. He was the one in the magazines. I was the ghost. I was the silent partner who reviewed every contract, corrected every blueprint, and ensured that our margins were the healthiest in the state. It was a strange existence. In the morning, I was invisible. In the afternoon, I was essential. I lived for those hours in the trailer. I lived for the moment I could put on my hard hat and walk a job site. The workers knew me only as the consultant. They didn't know I owned half the company. They just knew that when the old man in the suit pointed at a beam and shook his head, you fixed the beam. One Tuesday in late autumn, the two halves of my life collided in a way that almost made me laugh out loud. We were breaking ground on our biggest project yet, the Monarch. It was a 40-story residential tower right in the heart of the trendy arts district. It was the kind of building Trey dreamed of living in. Glass, steel, rooftop infinity pools. It was a masterpiece of engineering, and I had designed the cantilevered balconies myself. I had just finished a site walk. I was feeling good. The foundation pit was dug, the rebar was set perfectly, and the weather was holding. I had changed back into my disguise early because I needed to stop by the pharmacy. I was wearing my old trench coat and a flat cap pulled low. I was standing on the sidewalk perimeter, looking through the chain-link fence at the massive hole in the ground. I was admiring the geometry of the excavation. Suddenly, a black Porsche screeched to a halt right in front of me. The window rolled down. I didn't need to look to know who it was. The engine note was aggressive, impatient. "Hey, you!" I turned slowly. Trey was sitting in the driver's seat. He was wearing sunglasses even though it was overcast. Brittany was in the passenger seat, tapping furiously on her phone. "Dad?" Trey asked, pulling his sunglasses down. "What are you doing here?" I looked at my son. I looked at the car he couldn't afford. "I am just walking, Trey," I said, "taking some air." "Walking?" Trey scoffed. "Dad, this is the arts district. It is 5 miles from your house. Did you take the bus?" "I took the bus, yes," I lied. "It is good to see the city." Brittany leaned over. She didn't look at me. She looked at the construction site with a mixture of desire and annoyance. "Trey, tell him to move," she said. "He is standing right in front of the leasing sign. I am trying to see the square footage prices." Trey looked back at me. "Dad, you really shouldn't be wandering around here. This is a construction zone. It is dangerous. There is dust, heavy machinery. You know your balance isn't what it used to be. You could trip and fall into a hole." I looked at the hole I had dug, the hole that was going to generate $50 million in revenue over the next 3 years. "I am careful, son," I said. "I like watching them build." Trey laughed. It was a condescending sound. "Yeah, well, watching is all you can do. Look at this place, Dad. This is the future. This is where the winners live. Brittany and I are thinking of putting a deposit down on a penthouse here. Once the crypto market bounces back." I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from smiling. I knew the financials of the potential buyers. I knew the credit checks. Trey wouldn't qualify for a parking space in this building, let alone a penthouse. "It looks expensive," I said simply. "It is exclusive," Brittany corrected, finally looking at me. "That means expensive, Gus. It means it is not for people who take the bus." She turned to Trey. "Babe, let's go. We are going to be late for the lunch with the investors." And seeing him standing there in that old coat is depressing me. It ruins the vibe of the neighborhood. Trey nodded. "Look, Dad, seriously, go home. It is going to rain. And you look like, well, you look like a stray. Just go home and watch TV. Don't get in the way of the workers. These people have important jobs to do. Important jobs." I looked past him. Through the fence I saw the foreman, a man named Big Mike. He was looking at me. He gave me a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. He was waiting for my signal to pour the north corner. I looked back at my son. "You are right, Trey," I said. "I shouldn't be in the way. You two go on. Don't let me keep you from your success." Trey rolled up the window without saying goodbye. The Porsche roared away, weaving aggressively through traffic, desperate to be seen, desperate to matter. I watched them go. I watched the taillights of my own flesh and blood disappear around the corner. He told me I looked like a stray. He told me I was in the way. He told me to go watch TV while the real men worked. I waited until the car was gone. Then I turned back to the fence. I pushed open the gate that said, "Authorized personnel only." The security guard, a young man who had stopped Trey from parking there last week, stood up straight. "Afternoon, Mr. Miller," he said, snapping a salute. "Afternoon, John," I said. I walked onto the dirt. The foreman, Big Mike, walked over. He handed me a hard hat. Not a scratched one this time. A pristine white one with the word "owner" stenciled on the front. "Your son?" Mike asked, nodding toward the street. I took off my old trench coat, revealing the tailored suit underneath. I put on the hard hat. "No, Mike," I said, looking at the steel skeleton rising from the earth. "That was just a critic. And critics don't build skyscrapers." I pointed to the north corner. "Pour the concrete, Mike, and make sure the foundation is deep. We are building a legacy here, and legacies need to be strong enough to survive anything, even family." As the cement trucks roared to life at my command, I felt a profound sense of peace. Trey could have his Porsche. He could have his illusions. I had the dirt. I had the steel. And I had the truth. And one day, when he walked into the lobby of this building to beg for a loan or a lease, he would see the plaque on the wall. He would see the name M&G Construction. And maybe, just maybe, he would realize that the old man in the trench coat hadn't been watching the future. He had been building it. 5 years is a blink of an eye when you are building an empire, but it is an eternity when you are missing your child. For 5 years I lived my double life. By day I was the architect of the city's skyline, working from my hidden trailer alongside Mateo. By night, I was the hermit of Elm Street, the old man who mowed his own lawn and drove a car that belonged in a museum. I had become very good at being invisible. I had become very good at letting people underestimate me. But nothing prepares a father for the moment his little girl comes home and looks at him with pity. Zoe returned on a Tuesday. She had spent 5 years building schools in Southeast Asia, working for a non-profit organization. She had lived in places with no electricity and no running water. She had seen real poverty, so when she walked into my living room, dragging her battered suitcases behind her, I thought she would appreciate the simplicity of my life. I was wrong. She didn't see simplicity. She saw neglect. I was wearing my disguise, a faded flannel shirt with a fraying collar, and pants that I had intentionally let out at the waist to make me look frail. The house was clean, but I hadn't updated a single thing since her mother died. The wallpaper was peeling slightly in the corner. The radiator clanked. To me, it was just a house. To Zoe, it was a tragedy. "Dad," she whispered, dropping her bags. She walked across the room and hugged me. She smelled of jasmine and dust. She held me tight, tighter than she ever had before. I felt her shaking. "Oh, Dad," she said, pulling back and looking at my face. "You look so thin." "I am fit, Zoe," I said, smiling. "I walk every day." She looked around the room. Her eyes lingered on the old television, the one with the knobs. She looked at the stack of library books on the table, because I refused to pay for cable. She looked at the empty refrigerator, which I only stocked with the basics, because I ate most of my meals at site meetings. "It is freezing in here," she said, rubbing her arms. "Why isn't the heat on? Gas is expensive," I said automatically. It was the line I used to ward off salesmen, but to Zoe, it was a confession of destitution. She didn't say anything else. She just went to the kitchen and started making tea. I watched her moves. She was sharper now, tougher. But she still had that soft heart, the one that made her vulnerable. After she settled me into my chair with a blanket tucked around my legs as if I were an invalid, she grabbed her keys. "Where are you going?" I asked. "I am going to see Trey," she said. Her voice was hard, cold. "Zoe, you just got here. Rest." "I am not tired, Dad. I am angry." She stormed out. I watched her drive away in the rental car. I knew exactly where she was going. She was going to the sprawling McMansion in the gated community on the north side. The house Trey had bought 3 years ago. The house with the heated driveway and the 4-car garage. I sat in my chair and waited. I could have called her. I could have told her the truth right then. I could have opened the safe and showed her the bank statements of M&G Construction, showing that her father was worth $20 million. But I didn't, because I needed to know. I needed to know whose side she was on. I needed to know if she would fight for me or if she would join them. And more importantly, I needed to see what my son would do when confronted with his own hypocrisy. 2 hours later, Zoe returned. She looked defeated. The fire in her eyes was gone, replaced by a dull, watery sadness. She sat down on the ottoman in front of me and took my hands in hers. Her hands were warm, mine were cold. "I talked to Trey," she said softly, "and Brittany, and I asked carefully, 'How are they?' 'They are doing well,' she said. 'The house is impressive.'" She paused, biting her lip. She didn't want to say the next part. I could see the struggle in her face. She loved her brother. She wanted to believe him. "David," she said, looking deep into my eyes. "Trey told me everything I asked. He told me why you were living like this," she said. "He told me about the money." I stiffened. Had he found out? Had he discovered the company? "What money?" I asked. "The money you lost," she said. I blinked. "Lost. Trey said you have been struggling, Dad," she continued, her voice trembling. "He told me that after Mom died you got confused. He said you started gambling. He said you go to the track every afternoon. He said he and Brittany tried to help you. They tried to manage your finances, but you wouldn't let them. He said you drank it away, Dad." The lie was so audacious, so completely fabricated that it took my breath away. Gambling, drinking. Trey had taken my secret absences, my afternoons at the construction site, and he had twisted them into an addiction. He had turned my industry into a vice. It was brilliant, in a sick, twisted way. It explained why I was never home. It explained why I looked worn out. And most importantly, it absolved him of all guilt. He wasn't a bad son who abandoned his father. He was a helpless victim of a father who refused to be saved. I looked at Zoe. I waited for her to laugh. I waited for her to say, "That is ridiculous, Dad. You hate gambling, and you only drink wine on holidays." But she didn't laugh. She squeezed my hand. "It is okay, Dad," she whispered. "We don't have to talk about it. I know grief does terrible things to people. I am not judging you." She believed him. My heart cracked a little, not because of her, but because of him. My son had looked his sister in the eye after 5 years of separation and lied to her to protect his own ego. He had assassinated my character to hide his own greed. I didn't defend myself. I couldn't. If I denied it now without proof, I would just look like an addict in denial. And if I showed her the proof, I would blow my cover before the endgame. So I swallowed the bitter pill. "Is that what he said?" I asked quietly. "Yes," she said. "And Brittany was very concerned. She said they invited you to live with them, but you became aggressive." "Aggressive?" I remembered the day I cleaned the floor where Brittany had stood. Zoe took a deep breath. "Pack your bags, Dad." "What?" "You are not staying here," she said firmly. "I have an apartment in the city. It is small, but it is warm. You are coming with me. I am going to take care of you. We will get help for the other stuff. But you are not living in this icebox anymore." I looked at her. She was offering to upend her life for me. She was willing to take in a broken, addicted old man. She was good. She was so good. But I couldn't go. I had a company to run. I had a skyscraper to finish. I couldn't live in her apartment and sneak out to be a CEO. "No, Zoe," I said, gently pulling my hands away. "Dad, please don't be stubborn." "I am not being stubborn," I said. "I am being an adult. This is my home." "It is falling apart. It is standing just fine," I said. "And so am I." I stood up. I walked to the window and looked out at the street. "I appreciate the offer, Zoe. I really do. But I can't leave. Not yet." "Why not?" she demanded, standing up behind me. "What is keeping you here, Dad?" "The memories. The track." I turned around. "The plan," I said. "What plan?" "I have a plan, Zoe," I said, my voice steady. "I am working on something big, and I need to be here to finish it." She looked at me with pity. She thought I was delusional. She thought the plan was a winning lottery ticket or a lucky horse. "Okay, Dad," she sighed. "Okay, I won't force you tonight, but I am not leaving again. I am staying in town, and I am going to check on you every single day." "That is fine," I said. She sat back down on the sofa, deflating slightly. "There is something else," she said. She reached into her purse and pulled out a ring box. She opened it. It was a modest diamond, tasteful. "I am engaged, Dad. I smiled. For real this time. That is wonderful, Zoe. Who is he? His name is Julian, she said, a small smile touching her lips. He is like you, Dad. He is a builder. Well, a digital builder. He has a tech company. They are developing a new platform for sustainable supply chains. A tech company, I said, my smile faltering slightly. I remembered Trey's investments. He is a good man, Dad, Zoe said quickly, seeing my hesitation. He is brilliant. But what? But it is a hard time, she admitted. The market is crashing. His investors pulled out last week. He is trying to keep the company afloat until the wedding. We are using most of our savings to pay his developers. She looked down at the ring. That is why the wedding has to be small, she said. We can't afford much. Brittany offered to help plan it, but she wants to do it at some fancy place called the Grand Pavilion. She says she can get a family discount because Trey knows the owners. But even with a discount, we can't afford it. I froze. The Grand Pavilion. I knew that name. I knew it very well. I walked over to the bookshelf and pretended to straighten a picture frame. The Grand Pavilion, I repeated. Yes, Zoe said. It is the new event center downtown, the one with the glass roof. Brittany says it is the only place suitable for a Miller wedding. She is obsessed with it. I smiled, a secret, dangerous smile that Zoe couldn't see. Brittany was obsessed with the Grand Pavilion. Of course she was. It was the crown jewel of the city's event spaces, and she thought Trey knew the owners. That was the funniest joke I had heard in 5 years. Trey didn't know the owners. Trey wouldn't recognize the owners if they were standing in his living room, because M&G Construction didn't just build the Grand Pavilion. We owned it. I turned back to my daughter. Don't worry about the wedding, Zoe, I said. How can I not worry, Dad? We are broke. Julian is stressed out of his mind, and Trey keeps pressuring us to make it a society event so he can network. Let Trey plan it, I said. What? Let Brittany do whatever she wants, I said. Let her book the Grand Pavilion. Let her order the expensive flowers. Let her invite the whole city. But Dad, we can't pay for it. I walked over to her and kissed her on the forehead. You trust me, don't you? She looked at me. She saw the old man in the flannel shirt. She saw the man she thought was a gambling addict. But somewhere deep down she saw her father. I trust you, Dad. Then let them build the stage, I said. I looked at the peeling wallpaper. Because I have a feeling, I said softly, that the performance is going to be unforgettable. Zoe didn't understand. She thought I was just being optimistic. She hugged me one last time and left to go meet Julian. I watched her go. Then I went to my phone. I dialed Mateo. Partner, I said. Hey Gus, Mateo answered. You sound different. Good different. I am, I said. Listen, the Grand Pavilion. Do we have any bookings for the second weekend in June? Let me check, Mateo said. I could hear him typing. No, it is open. Why? Block it, I said. Block it. For who? For the Miller wedding, I said. Mateo paused. Your son. My daughter, I corrected. And Mateo? Yeah. Make sure the bill goes to Trey, I said. Send him the invoice for the deposit. He won't pay it, of course. He will try to use his connections. And what do I tell him? Mateo asked, laughing. Tell him the owner is a very difficult man, I said. Tell him the owner demands perfection. I hung up. My daughter was marrying a man who was broke but honest. My son was rich but morally bankrupt. And my daughter-in-law was about to walk into a trap she had set for herself. I went to the kitchen and made myself a cup of tea. It tasted sweet. The pieces were on the board. The players were in motion. And the old man in the corner, the one everyone thought was asleep, he was just waiting to say, checkmate. The following Sunday afternoon, I found myself sitting in the living room of my son's house. It was a house that looked like a furniture showroom, devoid of warmth, filled with white surfaces that screamed, "Do not touch." We were gathered for what Brittany called a strategy session. She didn't call it wedding planning. To her, this wasn't a celebration of love. It was a branding opportunity. Zoe sat on the edge of the sofa, looking small and overwhelmed. Her fiancé, Julian, was working a double shift at his failing tech startup, trying to scrape together enough cash to pay for the deposit on a community hall. Zoe had brought a binder. It was a simple thing, filled with pictures cut out from magazines. Pictures of wildflowers, string lights, and intimate garden parties. Brittany sat at the head of the table. She was wearing a headset, typing furiously on a tablet. She didn't even look up when Zoe opened her binder. "I was thinking," Zoe started, her voice tentative. "Maybe we could do something simple. There is a botanical garden in the city park. It is only $500 to rent. We could have a food truck and—" Brittany laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a sharp, barking sound that made Zoe flinch. "A food truck," Brittany repeated, finally looking up. "Zoe, honey, this is a wedding, not a taco festival. You are a Miller. You are Trey's sister. Do you have any idea who is going to be at this event?" Zoe blinked. "My friends? Dad?" Brittany rolled her eyes. She stood up and walked over to the mood board she had set up on an easel. It was covered in photos of gold cutlery, 10-foot-tall floral arrangements, and ice sculptures. "This isn't just about you, Zoe," Brittany said, lecturing her like a child. "This is about the family brand. Trey is on the verge of a major promotion. I am launching my lifestyle blog next month. We need this wedding to be an event. We need it to be Instagrammable. A food truck in a park says poverty. It says failure. Is that the message you want to send to the world?" Zoe looked down at her lap. "No, but Julian and I, we really can't afford—" "Stop talking about money," Brittany snapped. "It is tacky. Trey will handle the deposit. We will put it on the credit cards and figure it out later. You just need to show up and look pretty." I watched Trey. He was standing by the window, swirling a glass of scotch, even though it was 2 in the afternoon. He looked pale. He knew he couldn't afford this. He knew his credit cards were already maxed out. But he didn't say a word. He was too afraid of his wife's ambition to protect his sister's happiness. "So," Brittany continued, clapping her hands together, "the venue. I have already made the decision. We are going with the Grand Pavilion." I choked on my coffee. The Grand Pavilion. It was the newest, most exclusive event space in the city. It was a masterpiece of modern architecture, featuring a cantilevered glass roof, Italian marble floors, and a ballroom that floated over the city skyline. It was booked solid for 2 years. The waiting list was legendary, and I knew every inch of it. I knew that the marble was imported from Carrara because I signed the purchase order. I knew that the glass roof was reinforced with titanium alloy because I insisted on the upgrade. I knew the HVAC system, the electrical grid, and the Secret Service elevator in the back, because M&G Construction built it, and Ray B. Holdings, my holding company, owned the deed. Brittany looked at me with disdain. "Do you have a problem, Gus?" she asked. I set my cup down. "It is a very expensive venue, Brittany. I heard the deposit alone is $20,000. Brittany smirked. She walked over to me, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. "That is why you leave the planning to the adults, Gus," she said. "I know people. I have connections. I made a few calls this morning. I pulled some strings. They are going to squeeze us in for the second weekend in June. It is a miracle, really. But that is what happens when you have social capital." I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. She didn't have social capital. She had luck. She had called the booking office, and the booking manager, who worked for me, had seen the name Miller. He had probably flagged it in the system, wondering if it was a relation to the boss. Brittany turned back to Zoe. "It is settled. The Grand Pavilion. It will be black tie. I have already contacted a designer for your dress. The one you picked out was, well, let's just say it looked a little too off the rack." Zoe looked like she was about to cry. She didn't want a black tie gala. She wanted a party. But she was being steamrolled by a bulldozer in a Chanel suit. "Now," Brittany said, flipping a page on her tablet, "we need to talk about the guest list. And the seating chart. This is crucial." She projected a digital map of the ballroom onto the television screen. It was filled with round tables. "The head table will be here," she pointed to the center. "That is for the bridal party, Trey and myself. Obviously." She pointed to the tables surrounding the head table. "These are for our VIP guests, Trey's potential investors, my influencer friends, the people who matter. We need them close to the action so they can tag us in their photos." Then she pointed to the tables in the back, near the kitchen doors and the emergency exit. "And this," she said, zooming in on table 15, "this is the family table." I squinted at the screen. Table 15 was tucked behind a large structural pillar. It was in the shadows. It was the worst seat in the house. "Dad," Brittany said, turning to me with a fake smile, "this is where you will sit." I looked at the map. I looked at table 15. "You want the father of the bride to sit behind a pillar?" I asked calmly. Brittany sighed, as if explaining quantum physics to a toddler. "It is for the best, Gus. Look, we are going to have high-definition cameras everywhere. There will be a live stream. We are trying to project a very specific image. Young, vibrant, success." She gestured to my clothes. I was wearing my disguise, a brown corduroy jacket with elbow patches and scuffed shoes. Well, you have a certain rustic charm, I suppose, but on camera, it reads as neglect. We don't want people asking why Trey's father looks like he shops at a thrift store. It reflects poorly on Trey's financial status. If you sit at table 15, you can enjoy the food, hear the music, but you won't be in the background of the important shots. I looked at Trey. "Son," I asked, "you are okay with this? You want to hide me in the corner at your sister's wedding?" Trey looked at his shoes. He took a long drink of scotch. "It is just for the photos, Dad," he mumbled. "Brittany knows about these things. It is about the aesthetic, you know? The aesthetic. That word again. The word they use to justify erasing me. And the guest list?" I asked. Brittany tapped her screen. "We are tight on numbers, Gus. The Grand Pavilion is exclusive. We have to cap the count at 200. Trey and I have about 150 guests. Julian has his family. Zoe has a few friends." She looked at me. "So, unfortunately, we can't give you a +1. And we really can't accommodate any of your friends." "My friends?" I asked. "You know," Brittany waved her hand dismissively. "The old guys from the neighborhood, the people you play checkers with, or whatever it is you do all day. They wouldn't be comfortable at an event like this, Gus. It is $500 a plate. They wouldn't know which fork to use. It would be embarrassing for them. And for us." I thought about Mateo. I thought about Maria and Abuela. I thought about the family that had taken me in when these people threw me out. Mateo owned half the construction company that built the room Brittany was so desperate to stand in. He could buy this entire wedding with the cash in his pocket, and she was worried he wouldn't know which fork to use. The irony was so rich I could taste it. It tasted like blood. "So, let me get this straight," I said, standing up slowly. "You are hijacking my daughter's wedding. You are booking a venue you can't afford. You are putting it on credit cards that will cripple my son. And you are telling me that I, the father of the bride, must sit in the dark, alone, without a single friend, so I don't ruin your Instagram photos." Brittany crossed her arms. "When you put it like that, it sounds harsh, Gus. I prefer to think of it as strategic curation, but yes, that is the plan. Do you have a problem with it? Because if you do, you are welcome to not come. Though that would break Zoe's heart. She was holding Zoe hostage. She knew I wouldn't miss my daughter's wedding. She knew I would endure any humiliation to walk her down the aisle. I looked at Zoe. She was crying silently now, tears dripping onto her binder of wildflowers. She looked at me, shaking her head, begging me with her eyes not to make a scene, not to fight. She just wanted it to be over. I looked at Brittany. She was smug. She thought she had won. She thought she had put the old dog in his kennel. I took a deep breath. I channeled the patience of a sniper waiting for the perfect shot. "No, Brittany," I said. "I don't have a problem with it." Her eyes widened in surprise. "You don't?" "No," I said. "I think it is a brilliant plan. The Grand Pavilion is a magnificent choice, truly." I walked over to the screen. I touched the image of table 15. "And this table? It is perfect. I like the dark. It gives a man time to think. And as for my friends, you are right. They probably wouldn't fit in with your crowd." Brittany relaxed. She smiled, a genuine smile of relief. "Oh, Gus, thank you. I knew you would understand eventually. It is just business, really. We want everything to be perfect for Zoe." "For Zoe," I repeated. "Of course." I walked over to my daughter. I put a hand on her shoulder. "It is going to be a wedding to remember, sweetheart," I whispered. "I promise you that." I turned to leave. "Oh, Gus, one more thing," Brittany called out. I stopped at the door. "Try to find a tuxedo that fits," she said. "Maybe rent one? I can send you a coupon for a discount place. We don't want you looking like a waiter." I touched the lapel of my corduroy jacket. "Don't worry, Brittany," I said. "I will wear something appropriate." I walked out of the house. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns of the neighborhood that lived on credit and lies. I got into my Lincoln. I sat there for a moment, listening to the silence. They wanted me in the corner. They wanted me hidden. They wanted me alone. I picked up my phone. I dialed the number for M&G Construction. Mateo picked up on the first ring. "Boss?" he asked. "It is on," I said. "They booked it. Second weekend in June." "Did they pay the deposit?" Mateo asked. "Trey put it on 3 different credit cards," I said. "Approve the transaction, but add a clause to the contract. A strict one." "What kind of clause?" "Absolute discretion for the venue owner," I said. "The owner reserves the right to inspect the event at any time, and the owner reserves the right to seat his own guests." Mateo laughed. "You are a wicked man, Gus." "I am a father, Mateo," I said, "and I am about to teach my children a lesson they can't learn in a classroom." I looked back at the house. I could see Brittany pacing in the window, probably already posting about her venue victory. "Enjoy the spotlight, Brittany," I whispered, "because when I turn on the house lights, you are going to wish you were in the dark with me." I put the car in gear and drove away. I had a tuxedo to order, and I wasn't going to rent it. I was going to have it made in Italy. Silk, midnight blue, the kind of suit that doesn't just say success, it says ownership. Table 15. I smiled. Table 15 was about to become the most expensive real estate in the city. 2 weeks before the wedding, I went back to the house of white walls and white lies. The atmosphere was frantic. The dining room table was buried under mountains of RSVP cards, seating charts, and invoices. Trey looked like he hadn't slept in a week. His eyes were bloodshot, and he was drinking coffee that smelled like it had been burnt on the stove for hours. Brittany was pacing the room with her phone pressed to her ear, screaming at a florist about the shade of hydrangeas. They were drowning. I could see it. They were drowning in a sea of debt they had willingly jumped into, just to impress people they didn't even like. I stood in the doorway watching them. Part of me, the father part, wanted to write a check right then and there. I could have cleared the table. I could have paid for the flowers, the venue, the catering, and the honeymoon with one signature. It would have been so easy. But easy doesn't teach lessons. Easy breeds entitlement. And my son was already suffering from a terminal case of entitlement. Trey looked up and saw me. He didn't smile. He just sighed. "Hey, Dad, what are you doing here? We are busy." "I came to drop off my RSVP card," I said, walking into the room. I placed the small, cream-colored envelope on the table. It looked expensive. The paper was heavy stock, embossed with gold lettering. It probably cost $10 just for the invitation. "You could have mailed it," Brittany snapped, taking the phone away from her ear for a second. "We don't have time for social visits, Gus." "I know," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I won't stay long, but there is a box on the card I needed to discuss with you." "Which box?" Trey asked, rubbing his temples. "The meal choice." "Just pick the chicken, Dad. The steak is an extra $40. "No, not the meal," I said. "The guest list." I took a breath. This was the test, the final test. I had given them a chance to respect my home. They failed. I had given them a chance to respect my intelligence. They failed. Now I was giving them a chance to respect my heart. "The card says I am invited alone," I said. "Just Augustus Miller. No +1. Trey looked at me blankly. "Yeah, so I continued. "I would like to bring a guest." Brittany stopped pacing. She lowered her phone. She looked at me like I had just asked to bring a goat to the ceremony. "A guest," she repeated. "Who?" "A friend," I said. "A very good friend. His name is Mateo. He and his family, they have been very kind to me over the last few years. When I was alone on Thanksgiving, they took me in. When I needed help around the house, he was there. He is like family to me." I looked at Trey, hoping to see a flicker of gratitude, hoping he would be relieved that someone had been looking out for his father while he was busy ignoring me. But I didn't see gratitude. I saw annoyance. "Dad." Trey groaned, leaning back in his chair. "We talked about this. The guest list is capped. We are already over capacity." "It is one person, Trey," I said. "One chair." "It is not just a chair," Brittany interjected, walking over to the table. "It is a plate. Do you know how much a plate costs at the Grand Pavilion, Gus? I knew exactly how much it cost. I set the prices. $500, I said. Exactly, she said. $500, plus tax, plus gratuity. That is $600 for one person to eat a piece of salmon and drink champagne. She looked me up and down, her eyes cold and calculating. And frankly, Gus, we don't know this Mateo. Who is he? Is he one of your checkers buddies? Is he some old guy from the park who smells like mothballs? He is a businessman, I said. He owns a construction company. Trey laughed. It was a cruel, mocking sound. Construction, Trey scoffed. Dad, come on. Let's be real. You hang out at construction sites watching the workers. We know that. This guy is probably a bricklayer or a janitor you met on the bus. He is a good man, I said, my voice hardening. He has more integrity in his little finger than the people you are inviting to impress. That is not the point, Trey snapped, slamming his hand on the table. The point is the aesthetic, Dad. Look at the seating chart. He pointed to the digital map on his laptop. We have the CEO of Technova at table 3. We have the vice president of marketing at table 4. We have influencers. We have investors. These are high-caliber people, Dad. We can't have some random blue-collar friend of yours wandering around making small talk. It would be awkward. Awkward? I asked. Embarrassing, Brittany corrected. It would be embarrassing. We are trying to network, Gus. We are trying to elevate our status. Having your diverse group of friends there doesn't fit the brand. She used the word diverse like it was a slur, like it was something dirty. I looked at them. I really looked at them. They were sitting in a house they couldn't afford, planning a wedding they couldn't pay for, worrying about the opinions of people who didn't care about them. And in their desperate climb to the top, they were kicking the only people who actually loved them down the stairs. So the answer is no, I asked quietly. The answer is no, Dad, Trey said, taking a sip of his cold coffee. Come alone. Sit at table 15. Eat your chicken, and try not to make a scene. This is Zoe's day. Don't make it about you. Zoe's day. They kept using her name as a shield, but they weren't protecting Zoe. They were using her wedding as a stage for their own vanity. I looked at the RSVP card on the table. I reached out and picked up a pen. I checked the box for accept. I checked the box for chicken, and I drew a thick black line through the +1 field. I stared at that black line. It felt like drawing a line through my son's name in my will. It felt final. Okay, I said. Trey looked relieved. Brittany went back to her phone, instantly dismissing me. Thanks for understanding, Dad, Trey said without looking up. It is just economics. You get it. I get it, I said. I turned to leave. But at the door I stopped. Trey, I said. Yeah, Dad. You said the plate costs $500. Yeah. Why? I just wanted to be sure, I said. I wouldn't want you to lose money on me. Trey waved his hand dismissively. Don't worry about it. Just show up on time. And wear the tux Brittany sent you the link for. The cheap one. I walked out of the house. The air outside was warm, but I felt cold. A deep glacial cold that settles in the bones when you realize that the love you gave for 40 years was poured into a sieve. I walked to my car. I sat in the driver's seat of my Lincoln. My hands gripped the steering wheel. He called Mateo a janitor. He called my friends embarrassing. He put a price tag on my dignity. $500. That was what I was worth to him. A cost, a liability. I didn't start the car immediately. I sat there and let the feeling wash over me. It wasn't sadness anymore. Sadness implies hope. Sadness implies that you wish things were different. This wasn't sadness. This was resolve. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I dialed Mateo. He answered on the second ring. I could hear the sound of a saw in the background. Hey, Pops, Mateo shouted. Everything good? No, Mateo, I said. Everything is not good. The saw stopped instantly. What happened? Mateo asked, his voice dropping. Did they hurt you? They didn't hurt me, I said. They erased me. I told him what happened. I told him about the invite. I told him about the $500. I told him what Trey said about him. There was a silence on the other end of the line. A heavy, angry silence. He called me a what? Mateo asked quietly. He doesn't know you, Matteo, I said. He judged you without meeting you, just like he judged me. So I am not invited? Matteo said. No, I said. You are not invited by the groom. I paused. But you are invited by the landlord. Matteo chuckled, a low, dark sound. What do you want to do, Gus? I looked at the house one last time. I saw Trey walking past the window, still pacing, still stressed, still blind. I want to teach them a lesson in economics, I said. They are worried about the cost of a plate. They are worried about the price of admission. I took a deep breath. Matteo, get the suit. Get the whole family. Get Maria. Get the kids. Get Abuela. Abuela? Matteo asked, laughing. Especially Abuela, I said. She needs to judge the food. We are going to crash the wedding, Gus, Matteo asked. No, I said. We are not crashing. You can't crash a party when you own the building. We are going to perform an inspection, a structural inspection. We are going to test the strength of the foundation. And Matteo, I added, yeah, boss, bring the gift. The deed, Matteo asked. The deed, I said. I think it is time Zoe knew exactly who her father is. And I think it is time Trey knew exactly who he isn't. I hung up the phone. I started the car. The engine roared to life. I drove away from the white house with the white lies. I drove toward the city, toward the skyline, toward the future. Trey wanted me to sit in the dark at table 15. He wanted me to be invisible. He had no idea. Table 15 wasn't going to be a penalty box. It was going to be the command center. And when the lights went down and the speeches started, I wasn't going to be the lonely old man in the corner. I was going to be the man who turned on the lights. The rain was tapping against the window pane, a steady, rhythmic drumming that usually brought me peace, but tonight it sounded like a countdown. I sat in my armchair, the leather worn smooth by decades of reading and thinking. The house was quiet, too quiet. It was the kind of silence that comes before a storm breaks. I was looking at the calendar on the wall. June 10th, 2 days before the wedding. 2 days before the curtain rose on the play my family had scripted without knowing I was the director. Then the doorbell rang. It wasn't a polite ring. It was a desperate, continuous press, as if the person on the other side was leaning against the frame to keep from falling. I got up, my knees popping slightly. I walked to the door and opened it. Zoe was standing on the porch. She wasn't wearing a coat despite the rain. Her hair was plastered to her forehead, and her mascara was running down her cheeks in dark streaks. She looked like a ghost of the happy, vibrant girl who had come home 5 years ago. "Dad," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Zoe, come in." I pulled her inside out of the cold. She was shivering violently. I didn't ask questions. I just guided her to the living room and wrapped a heavy wool blanket around her shoulders. I went to the kitchen and put the kettle on. I made her tea with extra honey, just the way her mother used to make it when she scraped her knees as a child. When I handed her the mug, she gripped it with both hands, as if it were the only solid thing in the world. "Talk to me, sweetheart," I said, sitting on the ottoman in front of her. "What happened?" She took a shaky breath. "It is over, Dad. We have to cancel." "Cancel the wedding?" I asked gently. "Everything," she sobbed. "The wedding, the reception, the future." She took a sip of tea, her hands trembling so much the liquid sloshed over the rim. "Julian called me an hour ago. The investors, the venture capital firm that was supposed to fund his startup. They pulled out. The market volatility. They got scared. They withdrew the term sheet, Dad." I nodded slowly. I knew the market was rough. I had seen the indicators on my Bloomberg terminal in the trailer. But for Julian, it wasn't just a market correction. It was a death sentence. "He is broke, Dad," Zoe continued, tears spilling over again. "He put everything he had into payroll to keep his developers. He has zero liquidity. Nothing." "And the wedding?" I asked. "That is the worst part," she cried. "Brittany. She didn't listen to us, Dad. We gave her a budget. We told her $10,000 max. But she went ahead and booked the platinum package at the Grand Pavilion. She ordered the imported orchids. She ordered the 5-course meal with the lobster tail." Zoe looked at me with wide, terrified eyes. "She put the deposits on her credit card, but the contract is in my name, Dad. She made me sign it electronically weeks ago, saying it was just a formality to hold the date." I felt a flash of cold anger. Brittany hadn't just hijacked the wedding, she had set my daughter up as the fall guy. "How much?" I asked. $50,000, Zoe whispered. The final balance is due tomorrow morning. If we don't pay, they cancel the event and we lose the deposits. And worse. Brittany says if we cancel, we still owe the full amount because it is within the 48-hour window. She buried her face in her hands. We don't have $50,000, Dad. Julian has $40 in his checking account. I have my savings, but that is for our rent. We are going to start our marriage in bankruptcy court. Brittany is screaming at me. She says I am embarrassing the family. She says I am ruining her brand launch because she invited all these influencers. I looked at my daughter. She was broken. She was being crushed by the weight of expectations she never asked for. I reached out and took her hands, pulling them away from her face. Zoe, look at me. She looked up, her eyes red and swollen. Do you love Julian? I asked. Yes, she sobbed. More than anything. He is a good man, Dad. He is just unlucky right now. And does he love you? Yes. Then the marriage isn't canceled, I said firmly. The marriage is the two of you. The wedding is just a party. But the money, Dad, Zoe cried. The venue, the contract, they will sue us. Brittany said the owners of the Grand Pavilion are ruthless. She said they will come after our assets. I had to suppress a smile. Ruthless. Yes, I suppose I could be ruthless when I needed to be, but not to my own blood. Zoe, I said, my voice calm and low. I want you to listen to me very carefully. I waited until she stopped crying and focused on my face. You are not going to cancel. But Dad, you are going to go home, I said. You are going to hug Julian. You are going to tell him that his bad luck is just a chapter, not the whole book. And tomorrow you are going to put on that dress. But the money, she repeated, her voice rising in panic. Who is going to pay the $50,000, Dad? Trey won't. He says his liquidity is tied up in crypto. Brittany won't. She says it is our responsibility. I leaned back. I looked around my modest living room. I looked at the peeling wallpaper and the old furniture. Let them have their party, I said. Let Brittany have her influencers. Let Trey play the big shot host. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a handkerchief. I handed it to her. Don't worry about the bill, Zoe. She looked at me confused. Dad, what are you talking about? It is $50,000. I smiled. It was a gentle smile, the smile of a grandfather giving a grandchild a candy bar. I have a little savings, I said. Zoe froze. She looked at me with a mixture of love and pity. Dad, she said softly, you live on a fixed income. You clip coupons. I know you have a little nest egg for emergencies, but $50,000? That is your life savings. That is your medical money. I can't take that. It is a little more than you think. I lied smoothly. I put some away back in the good years, before Mom got sick. It is sitting in a rainy day fund. Dad, no, Zoe said, shaking her head. I won't let you destitute yourself for a party. It is not worth it. It is worth it to see you smile, I said. And besides, maybe the owner of the venue will be lenient. Maybe he will work out a payment plan. Brittany says he is a shark, Zoe said, shivering. She said he is impossible to reach. I laughed. Sharks have hearts too, I said. Sometimes. I stood up and pulled her into a hug. She felt frail against me. Trust me, Zoe. Go home. Get some sleep. Tomorrow is the rehearsal dinner. Sunday is the wedding. Just show up. Look beautiful. Marry the man you love. But Dad, let me worry about the sharks, I said. I have been swimming in deep water a long time. She pulled back and looked at me. She didn't believe I could pay the whole thing. She probably thought I would pay a few thousand to hold them off, or maybe take out a loan against the house. She looked at me with such profound gratitude and sadness. She thought her poor old father was sacrificing his last dime for her. You are the best man I know, Dad, she whispered. I don't deserve you. You deserve the world, I said. Now go. I walked her to the door. The rain had stopped. The air smelled clean and fresh. I watched her drive away. As soon as her taillights disappeared, I walked back into the living room. I picked up my phone. I dialed the number for M&G Construction. Mateo, I said. Boss Mateo answered. You sound cheerful. I am, I said. Listen, the invoice for the Miller wedding. Yeah, I have it right here, Mateo said. It is due tomorrow at 9 a.m. If not, the system automatically cancels the booking. Mark it as paid, I said. Paid, Mateo asked. Who paid it? The owner, I said. But Gus Mateo hesitated. That is 50 grand. You are just going to eat the cost. I am not eating it, I said, my voice hardening. I am investing it. Investing in what? Investing in the reveal, I said. I walked over to the window. Mateo, send a receipt to Brittany's email, I instructed. But don't put a name on the payer field. Just put anonymous donor. She is going to freak out, Mateo laughed. She is going to think she has a secret admirer, or that her influence is so big someone sponsored her. Exactly, I said. Let her ego swell. Let her think she is the queen of the city. Let her strut around that ballroom thinking she got away with it. Because the higher she flies, the harder she falls. And Mateo, I added. Yeah, table 15. Make sure the lighting is dramatic. You got it, boss. I hung up the phone. Zoe thought I was giving her my life savings. She didn't know that $50,000 was what M&G Construction made before lunch on a Tuesday. She thought I was a fragile old man trying to be a hero. She had no idea that I wasn't the hero of this story. I was the author, and the final chapter was going to be a masterpiece. The Grand Pavilion did not just sit on the city skyline, it dominated it. It was a cathedral of commerce and celebration, a structure composed of soaring glass walls and reinforced steel beams that caught the afternoon sun and shattered it into a million diamonds. I stood at the base of the main staircase, looking up at the cantilevered roof. I remembered the day I drew the initial sketch for that roof on a napkin in a diner. I remembered the arguments with the city engineers who said it couldn't be done. I remembered the exact tensile strength of the cables holding it up. To the hundreds of guests filing in, wearing their rented tuxedos and sequined gowns, this was just a fancy building. To me, it was a symphony of physics and ambition. I handed my keys to the valet. He was a young kid, new to the job. He looked at my 10-year-old Lincoln with a sneer. He didn't know that the car was in perfect mechanical condition. He just saw an old sedan that didn't fit the parade of Mercedes and Range Rovers lining the drive. "Keep it close, son," I said, pressing a $20 bill into his hand. "I won't be staying late." He took the money without saying thank you and drove off, peeling out slightly just to show his disdain. I adjusted my jacket. It was midnight blue made of vicuña wool and silk. I had flown my tailor in from Milan to measure me for it 3 weeks ago. It cost more than the valet's car. It fit me like a second skin, moving with every breath, hiding the slight stoop in my shoulders and making me look 10 years younger. But it had no logos. It had no flashy buttons. To the untrained eye, it was just a suit. I walked up the stairs. The air inside smelled of imported lilies and expensive perfume. The lobby was a cavern of white marble and gold leaf, and standing in the center of it, acting like royalty holding court, were my son Trey and his wife Brittany. Brittany was wearing a dress that probably cost more than my house. It was silver tight and covered in crystals. She looked like a disco ball. She was shouting at a waiter who was trying to balance a tray of champagne flutes. "No, I said the vintage Dom Perignon for the VIP hour," she hissed, snapping her fingers in the poor man's face. "This is the regular brute. Take it back." "Do you know who I am? I am the host." The waiter looked terrified. I recognized him. His name was Henri. He had been with my catering company for 10 years. He was a good man with 3 kids. I stepped forward. "Brittany," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. She spun around. Her eyes scanned me up, down, and then up again. She didn't smile. She didn't say hello. She just let out a short, sharp breath of relief. "Oh, good," she said. "You are here, and you are on time for once." She walked over to me, her heels clicking aggressively on the marble I had paid for. She reached out and plucked a piece of imaginary lint off my lapel. "Well," she said, tilting her head, "it fits better than I expected. Did you use the coupon I sent you?" I didn't answer. I just looked at her. "It is fine," she continued, answering her own question. "It is clean. That is all that matters. Just try not to stand next to the groomsmen. Their suits are Armani, and the difference in quality will be obvious in the photos." The irony was so thick I could almost taste it. She was looking at a $5,000 bespoke masterpiece and comparing it unfavorably to an off-the-rack suit that Trey had put on a credit card. It was the perfect metaphor for her entire life. She knew the price of everything and the value of nothing. Trey walked over. He looked sweaty. He was holding a glass of scotch, and his eyes were darting around the room, looking for someone important to impress. "Dad," he said, giving me a limp handshake. You made it. Look, we are swamped right now. The CEO of Technova just walked in and I need to go network. He grabbed my arm. His grip was firm, steering me away from the center of the room. We need to get you to your seat, Trey said, pushing me toward the back of the lobby. My seat? I asked. The ceremony hasn't started yet. I know, but we can't have you wandering around, Trey whispered, his voice tight with stress. These are high-caliber people, Dad. We are talking about potential investors for my crypto fund. We are talking about Brittany's brand partners. We need the aesthetic to be cohesive. Cohesive, I repeated, and I disrupt the cohesion. Trey didn't even have the grace to look ashamed. It is just the vibe, Dad, you know? You are a little rustic. We want people to focus on the future, not the past. He guided me past the bar, past the ice sculpture of a swan, past the tables where the beautiful people were laughing and drinking. He walked me all the way to the back corner of the ballroom. There was a large structural pillar there, wrapped in white silk. Behind it, tucked away in the shadows, next to the swinging doors of the kitchen, was table 15. It was a small, round table. There were no flowers on it, no crystal glasses, just basic place settings and a clear view of the waiters rushing in and out with dirty dishes. Here we go, Trey said, patting the back of a chair. This is a great spot. You are close to the food, so you will get served first. And it is quiet. You can just relax and watch. Watch? I asked, from behind a pillar. You can lean out, Trey said, demonstrating. See? If you lean like this, you can see the head table perfectly. He checked his watch. Okay, I have to go. Just sit here, Dad, please. Don't go walking around trying to make friends. These people, they aren't your crowd. They talk about stocks and art. It would be awkward for you. Just drink your water and wait for the speeches. He turned to leave, but then stopped. Oh, and Dad. Yes, Trey. When the photographer comes around, maybe just look down at your plate, or turn away. We are going for a very specific editorial look for the album. I looked at my son. He was sweating in his tight suit, terrified that his own father would ruin his illusion of success. He was a small man in a big room, and he thought pushing me into the dark would make him shine brighter. I didn't get angry. I didn't argue. I sat down. That is fine, son, I said, leaning back in the chair. You go network. You go build your future. Thanks, Dad, Trey said, relieved. You are the best. He ran back toward the light, leaving me in the shadows. I sat there for a moment, watching the room. I saw Henri the waiter come out of the kitchen. He saw me sitting there alone at the bad table. He stopped. His eyes went wide. He started to rush over, a look of horror on his face. He knew who I was. He knew I owned the building. He was probably coming to ask why the chairman was sitting in the penalty box. I raised a finger to my lips. I shook my head slightly. Henri paused. He understood. He nodded once a professional nod and went back to his work serving champagne to the people who treated him like furniture. I looked around my little corner. It was dark, yes, but from here I could see everything. I could see the cracks in Brittany's smile as she greeted a rival influencer. I could see the panic in Trey's eyes as the Technova CEO checked his watch while Trey was talking. I could see the waiters rolling their eyes behind the guests' backs. It was the perfect vantage point. Brittany thought she had banished me. She thought she had hidden her shame. She didn't know that she had just put the sniper in the perfect nest. I reached into my inside pocket and pulled out my phone. I sent a text to Mateo. The Eagle has landed. They put me at table 15. The view is spectacular. A second later, the reply came. Copy that, boss. The cavalry is 5 minutes out. Hold the fort. I put the phone away. I picked up the glass of water Trey had pointed out. It was warm tap water. I took a sip. It tasted like victory. Let them have their hour, I thought, watching Trey laugh too loudly at a joke he probably didn't understand. Let them strut and pose, because the doors were about to open, and the real VIPs were coming. And they weren't going to be looking for the groom. They were going to be looking for the man in the corner. The view from table 15 was obscured by a silk-wrapped pillar and the constant swinging of the kitchen doors, but it offered a direct line of sight to the main entrance. I sat there, sipping my lukewarm tap water, watching the theater of my son's life play out. Trey was sweating through his Armani suit, trying to corner a venture capitalist near the ice sculpture. Brittany was snapping her fingers at the string quartet, demanding they play something more viral. The room was filled with people who were desperately trying to look like they belonged, and failing miserably. Then the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't a sound, it was a vibration. A low, deep rumble that started outside on the driveway and permeated through the glass walls of the lobby. The valet kids stopped scrolling on their phones. The guests near the windows stopped talking and turned to look. Even Brittany paused mid-sentence, her eyes widening as she looked past the velvet ropes. A convoy had arrived. It wasn't just a car, it was a fleet. 3 matte black Cadillac Escalades with tinted windows and chrome rims rolled up the driveway in perfect formation. They moved with the heavy, predatory grace of government vehicles, or motorcades for heads of state. They didn't look like rented limousines. They looked like power. They looked like the kind of vehicles that didn't stop for red lights. Brittany gasped. She grabbed Trey's arm so hard I saw him wince from across the room. "Oh my God, Trey," she whispered, loud enough for half the lobby to hear. "Is that the governor? Did you invite the governor?" "I didn't," Trey stammered, looking panicked. "I mean, maybe. I sent invites to everyone. Maybe he actually came." Brittany frantically smoothed her dress. She checked a reflection in a silver tray held by a passing waiter. "Quick," she hissed. "Get the photographer. Get the videographer. I want this arrival documented. If this is a VIP, we need it on the live stream immediately." She rushed to the center of the lobby, posing herself perfectly under the chandelier, putting on her best hostess smile. She looked ready to greet royalty. The lead SUV stopped. The driver, a massive man with a coiled earpiece, stepped out. He didn't look at the valet. He walked around to the back door of the middle vehicle and opened it with a gloved hand. The lobby held its breath. A polished black Oxford shoe stepped onto the pavement. Then a leg clad in razor-sharp Italian wool. Matteo Rivera stepped out. He wasn't wearing his construction boots today. He wasn't wearing his dusty t-shirt. He was wearing a 3-piece charcoal suit that fit his broad shoulders like armor. His tie was silk, a deep emerald green. He wore gold cufflinks that caught the sun. He looked like a heavyweight champion who had just bought the casino. He turned and offered his hand to the interior of the car. Maria stepped out. My jaw almost hit the table. The tired mother who usually wore yoga pants was gone. In her place was a queen. She was wearing a floor-length gown of midnight blue velvet. Her hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, exposing diamond earrings that sparkled with legitimate fire. Then came the kids. Leo, the boy who broke his truck, was in a miniature tuxedo, looking like a young James Bond. Sophia, the teenager, was in a tasteful cocktail dress, holding a designer clutch. And finally, Abuela. The old woman emerged from the third SUV. She was wearing a fur coat that looked vintage and incredibly expensive. She leaned on a cane topped with a silver handle. She didn't look like a grandmother. She looked like the matriarch of a dynasty. They stood there for a moment, a phalanx of elegance and strength against the backdrop of the setting sun. Brittany's smile faltered. She squinted. She tilted her head. She didn't recognize them. She was expecting a politician or a tech mogul. Instead, she saw a Latino family looking better than her entire wedding party. "Who is that?" she whispered to Trey. "Do you know them?" "I have no idea," Trey muttered. "Are they investors? Maybe they are crashers," Brittany said, her eyes narrowing. "They look too confident. They are probably trying to sneak in for the open bar." She marched forward, her heels clicking aggressively. She wasn't going to let unknown elements ruin her aesthetic. She stopped 10 feet from Matteo, blocking his path to the front doors. "Excuse me," Brittany said, her voice shrill. Matteo stopped. He looked down at her. He didn't smile. He adjusted his silk tie with a slow, deliberate motion. "Can I help you, ma'am?" Matteo asked, his voice deep and calm. "This is a private event," Brittany announced, crossing her arms over her sequined chest. "The entire venue is booked for the Miller wedding. Unless you have an invitation, I am going to have to ask you to return to your vehicles. The public entrance is around the back." She gestured dismissively toward the parking lot. Matteo didn't move. He didn't look at the parking lot. He looked right at her. "We are not looking for the public entrance," he said, "and we are not lost." Trey stepped up beside his wife, trying to puff out his chest. He looked small next to Matteo. "Look, buddy," Trey said, trying to sound authoritative. "I am the groom. I am the host, and I know every name on the guest list. Rivera, right? I don't recall inviting a Rivera family. So, unless you want me to call security, you need to leave. We have VIPs arriving, and you are blocking the driveway." Abuela said something in Spanish. It sounded sharp. Maria placed a calming hand on her arm. Mateo smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a wolf looking at a poodle. "You are the host," Mateo repeated. "That is interesting, because usually the host pays the bills." Trey flushed red. "Excuse me, we are here as guests," Mateo said simply. "We are guests of the chairman." "The chairman." Brittany laughed a harsh barking sound. "What are you talking about? There is no chairman here. This is a wedding, not a board meeting. You are definitely at the wrong place. This is the Grand Pavilion. We know exactly where we are," Mateo said. "We built it." Before Brittany could respond, the heavy glass doors of the venue flew open. A man in a tuxedo rushed out. It was Mr. Henderson, the general manager of the Grand Pavilion. Mr. Henderson was a man who terrified everyone. He was known for making servers cry if a fork was out of alignment. He was the man Brittany had been trying to impress for months, terrified of his judgment. Mr. Henderson ignored Brittany. He ignored Trey. He ignored the guests watching from the windows. He walked straight up to Mateo Rivera, and he bowed. It wasn't a small nod. It was a deep, respectful bow from the waist. "Mr. Rivera," Mr. Henderson said, his voice trembling slightly with reverence. "Welcome back, sir. We didn't expect you to grace us with your presence today. It is an honor, truly an honor." Brittany's mouth fell open. She looked at Mr. Henderson, then at Mateo, then back at Mr. Henderson. "Mr. Henderson," she stammered, Do you know these people? They are crashing my wedding." Mr. Henderson stood up straight. He looked at Brittany with a cold disdain that froze the blood in her veins. "Mrs. Miller," he said icily, "Mr. Rivera is not crashing. Mr. Rivera is the co-owner of M&G Construction." He swept his hand toward the building, toward the glass roof, toward the marble floors. "He built this facility," Mr. Henderson continued. "He owns the walls you are standing in. If Mr. Rivera wishes to attend your wedding, he does not need an invitation. He has the keys." The silence that followed was absolute. The valet stopped the car. The string quartet inside seemed to fade away. Trey looked like he had been slapped. He looked at Mateo's suit. He looked at the Escalades. You own the building," Trey whispered. "Half of it," Mateo corrected. He looked past Trey. He looked past Brittany. He looked through the glass doors of the lobby, straight to the back of the room, straight to the shadows where I was sitting. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "I am just the junior partner," Mateo said, turning his gaze back to Trey. "I am here representing the majority shareholder, the chairman." "The chairman?" Brittany whispered, the color draining from her face. "Who is the chairman?" Mateo didn't answer her. He just smiled again. "Mr. Henderson," Mateo said, "is the special table ready?" "Yes, sir," Mr. Henderson said instantly. "Table 15, sir. We have prepared it exactly as requested." "Table 15. Brittany gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth. "No, that is impossible. Table 15 is—" Mateo stepped forward, forcing Brittany to step back. "Table 15 is where the real power sits, Mrs. Miller," Mateo said. He turned to his family. "Vamos," he said. The Rivera family walked past the stunned couple. They walked with their heads high. Abuela paused for just a second in front of Brittany. She looked at Brittany's silver dress. She looked at her terrified face. She made a tisk-tisk sound, shook her head, and kept walking. "Mr." Henderson rushed ahead to hold the door open for them. Trey and Brittany were left standing on the pavement alone in the spotlight they had created, looking like two children who had wandered into a game they didn't understand. Trey grabbed Brittany's arm. "Table 15, he hissed. "Brittany, that is where we put Dad." Brittany looked at him, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. "Why would the owner of the building want to sit with your father?" she whispered. "I don't know," Trey said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "But I have a really bad feeling we are about to find out." Inside the ballroom, I watched them enter. The room parted for them. Mateo didn't stop at the bar. He didn't stop to network. He led his family straight through the crowd, straight past the VIP tables, straight past the influencers. He walked right up to the pillar in the dark corner. He stopped in front of my table. He didn't bow. He did something better. He grinned, that gold tooth flashing in the dim light, and he pulled out the chair next to me. "Hey, Pops," he said loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "Sorry we are late. Traffic was a nightmare. But we brought backup." He gestured to the waiters, who were suddenly swarming our table, carrying bottles of the expensive vintage champagne, the stuff Brittany had been denied. I looked at my son standing in the doorway, looking terrified. I looked at Matteo sitting beside me, looking like a king. I raised my glass of water. "Right on time, partner," I said. "Right on time." The wedding hadn't even started yet, but the funeral for my son's ego had just begun. The ballroom was a sea of whispers as the Rivera family made their way across the marble floor. It was a long walk from the entrance to the back corner, where I sat in the shadows of table 15. Usually, when wealthy, powerful people enter a room, they gravitate toward the center. They seek the light. They seek the head table. But Matteo Rivera cut a path straight through the middle of the room, ignoring the outstretched hands of people desperate to be noticed by him. I saw the CEO of Technova, the man Trey had been sweating to impress all evening, actually stand up as Matteo approached. He adjusted his tie and prepared a smile, ready to intercept this new power player. But Matteo walked right past him. He didn't even blink. He treated the billionaires and the influencers like they were traffic cones on a construction site, obstacles to be navigated around, not destinations to be reached. The hush that fell over the room was absolute. You could hear the ice melting in the glasses. Everyone was asking the same question. Where is he going? Why is the man who owns the building walking toward the kitchen doors? When Matteo finally reached my table, the pillar that was supposed to hide me became the spotlight. He didn't stand on ceremony. He didn't wait for a waiter to pull out his chair. He stopped right in front of me, his face breaking into a grin that was brighter than the chandelier above us. "Hey, Pops," he said, his voice booming in the quiet corner. He didn't offer a handshake. He opened his arms and pulled me into a bear hug. It wasn't a gentle, polite hug. It was a crushing embrace, the kind that smelled of expensive cologne and genuine affection. It was the hug of a son returning from war, finding his father safe. I hugged him back. I patted his back, feeling the solid muscle beneath the Italian wool. "Hello, Matteo," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You made an entrance." "We try," Matteo laughed, pulling back but keeping his hands on my shoulders. He looked me up and down, inspecting my tuxedo. "Looking sharp, Gus. The Cunha wool?" "You know it," I said. Matteo turned to the table. Maria was already seated, organizing the kids. Abuela was standing there, looking at the table setting with profound disappointment. She picked up a fork, examined it, and dropped it back onto the table with a clatter of disdain. "Table 15, Matteo said, shaking his head. He looked at the swinging kitchen doors just 3 feet away. He looked at the shadow cast by the pillar. "They really put you in the penalty box, didn't they, Pops?" "It is quiet," I said, shrugging. "I like the quiet. Quiet is for libraries," Matteo said. "This is a wedding." He snapped his fingers. Henri, the waiter who had been terrified of Brittany earlier, appeared instantly. He looked relieved to see friendly faces, even if those faces belonged to the owners. "Mr. Rivera," Henri said, bowing slightly. "Henri," Matteo said, "this table is too small. We have a full house. Bring 2 more chairs. And Henri?" "Yes, sir?" "Get the good wine, not the swill they are serving out there. Go to my private reserve in the cellar. Bring the 82 Bordeaux, and bring some juice for the kids." Henri nodded vigorously and vanished. I watched as the Rivera family settled in. The table that was meant for one lonely old man was suddenly overflowing with life. Leo was showing me his cufflinks. Sophia was complimenting my tie. Maria was holding my hand, asking if I had been eating enough. For a moment, the rest of the wedding didn't exist. The glitz, the glamour, the pretension. It all faded away. I was back at the Golden Fork on Thanksgiving. I was surrounded by warmth. But in the center of the room, the storm was gathering. I saw Trey. He was standing near the head table, his face a mask of panic and confusion. He was watching the most important guest in the room, sitting with the father he had tried to erase. He saw the waiters rushing to our table with bottles that weren't on the menu. He saw the guests at the nearby tables turning their chairs around to watch us instead of looking at the bride and groom. His aesthetic was crumbling. His narrative was falling apart. Brittany was whispering furiously in his ear, pointing at us with a jagged, acrylic nail. She looked like she was about to scream. Trey nodded. He downed the rest of his scotch in one gulp. He straightened his jacket. And then he started marching toward us. He didn't look like a groom coming to greet guests. He looked like a bouncer coming to throw out a drunk. His face was flushed red, contrasting clashes with his white collar. He stomped past the VIP tables. He ignored his sister Zoe, who was watching from the head table with a look of hope on her face. He came straight for us. He stopped at the edge of our table. He loomed over me, trying to use his height to intimidate. "What is going on here?" Trey demanded, his voice trembling with rage. The table went silent. Leo stopped playing with his fork. Maria stopped smiling. Mateo didn't even look up. He was busy pouring a glass of apple juice for his youngest. "I asked a question," Trey snapped, louder this time. Mateo slowly set the pitcher down. He turned his chair. He looked up at Trey with eyes that were cold and hard as granite. "We are having dinner," Mateo said, calm. "What does it look like we are doing?" Trey pointed a shaking finger at me. "You are confusing him," Trey spat. "Look at him. He is an old man. He doesn't know who you are. He probably thinks you are the gardener." I sat very still. My son was doing it again. He was dehumanizing me in front of the very people who treated me like a king. Trey turned his anger on Mateo. "I don't know what kind of game you are playing, buddy, but this is my father. He is fragile. He has issues. You can't just barge in here and take advantage of him." "Take advantage," Mateo repeated, his voice dangerously low. "Yes," Trey shouted. "He is vulnerable. He lives in the past. He sits in his house and stares at the wall. He doesn't have money. He doesn't have influence. And I won't let you use him for whatever sick joke this is." He grabbed my arm. His grip was painful. "Come on, Dad," Trey said, pulling on me. "You need to come with me. We are going to find you a quiet room where you can lie down. You are clearly overwhelmed. These people are bothering you." I didn't move. I didn't resist. I just looked at his hand on my sleeve. "Take your hand off him." The voice didn't come from me. It came from Mateo. Mateo stood up. He rose slowly, unfolding his frame until he towered over Trey. I said, "Take your hand off him." Trey flinched. He let go of my arm. He stepped back, intimidated by the sheer physical presence of the man in front of him. "You are making a scene," Trey hissed. "This is my wedding, and this is my friend," Mateo said. "Your friend?" Trey laughed, a hysterical, high-pitched sound. "You don't even know him. He is a retired bricklayer. He is nobody." The ballroom was silent now. Everyone was watching. The music had stopped. Mateo stepped closer to Trey. He invaded his personal space. He leaned down until his face was inches from Trey's. "Nobody?" Mateo asked softly. He turned and looked at me. He looked at the man in the bespoke suit. He looked at the man who had taught him how to save a failing project with a pencil and a napkin. "You call him nobody," Mateo said, his voice rising so the room could hear. "You call him fragile? You call him senile?" Mateo laughed. It was a dark, incredulous laugh. "You idiot," Mateo said. He pointed at me with absolute reverence. "This man isn't senile. This man is the sharpest mind in this entire city." Trey scoffed. "He is a retired engineer. He hasn't worked in 30 years. Mateo shook his head. "You really don't see it, do you? You look at him and you see an old coat. I look at him and I see the architect." Mateo gestured to the glass roof above us. "Who do you think designed the stress load for that roof, Trey? Who do you think calculated the wind shear for the foundation? Who do you think sat in a trailer for 5 years, reviewing every single blueprint, every single contract, every single invoice for M&G Construction?" Trey blinked. "What are you talking about?" "I am talking about the brain," Mateo roared. He placed a hand on my shoulder. "I am the muscle," Mateo said, tapping his own chest. "I pour the concrete. I shake the hands. But him?" He patted my shoulder. "He is the brain of M&G Construction. He is the silent partner. He is the reason this building is standing. He is the reason my company is worth $50 million. Trey looked at me. His mouth opened and closed. "That is impossible," Trey stammered. He mows his own lawn. He drives a Lincoln." Mateo smiled. "Because he is humble," Mateo said. Because he doesn't need to drive a Porsche to feel like a man. Because he knows that wealth isn't what you wear, it is what you build. Matteo leaned in close to Trey again. You treated him like trash, Matteo whispered. You put him in the corner behind a pillar. You told him he wasn't worth a $500 plate. Matteo picked up a bottle of the vintage Bordeaux that Henri had just placed on the table. A bottle worth $2,000. This bottle alone is worth more than your car, Matteo said. And we are drinking it to toast the man you threw away. Trey looked at the bottle. He looked at Matteo. He looked at me. Dad? Trey asked, his voice small. Is this true? I looked at my son. I saw the fear in his eyes. The realization was starting to dawn on him. He wasn't just losing an argument. He was realizing that the ATM he thought was broken had actually been a vault all along. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. Sit down, Trey, I said calmly. But Dad, sit down, I repeated, or go back to your head table. But do not stand here and insult my partners. Partners, Trey whispered. Yes, I said, partners. I looked at Matteo. Thank you, Matteo. Matteo nodded. Always, Pops. Trey stood there for a moment longer, frozen in the spotlight of his own humiliation. He looked around the room. The guests were whispering. Brittany was staring at him with daggers in her eyes from across the room. He had lost control. The narrative had shifted. The crazy old man in the corner was suddenly the most powerful person in the room. Trey backed away. He retreated. He turned and walked fast, almost running, back toward the safety of his wife and his illusions. I watched him go. I sat back down. Maria reached over and squeezed my hand. That was intense, she said softly. It was necessary, I replied. Abuela looked at me. She pointed her fork at the retreating figure of my son. Mal hijo, she muttered. Bad son. Then she pointed at the bottle of wine. Open it, she commanded. Matteo pulled the cork. The sound was a soft pop, like a sigh of relief. He poured the wine, dark, rich, and full of history. To the brain, Matteo said, raising his glass. I raised mine. To the truth, I said. We clanked glasses. The crystal sang, and across the room, at the head table, I saw Brittany frantically typing on her phone, trying to figure out who Augustus Miller really was. She was about to find out that Google wouldn't help her, because the real power doesn't post on Instagram. The speeches were winding down. The best man, a college buddy of Julian's, had just finished a heartfelt, if slightly tipsy toast about perseverance. The room applauded politely. The waiters were clearing the dessert plates, and the air was thick with the scent of coffee and impending dancing. I sat at table 15, watching the head table like a hawk. I saw Brittany signal the DJ. She drew a finger across her throat, the universal sign for cut it. She was trying to end the speeches before the father of the bride could take the microphone. She leaned over to the MC, whispering furiously. I could read her lips. She was saying we are behind schedule. She was saying skip him. She was trying to silence me one last time, afraid that the crazy old man from the corner would ramble about the weather or, worse, tell the truth. But Zoe stood up. My daughter, who had spent months being bulldozed by Brittany's ambition, who had let her wedding be hijacked for an aesthetic, finally found her voice. She placed her hand over the microphone before the MC could take it away. No, Zoe said. Her voice boomed through the speakers, startling the room. She looked at Brittany. She didn't look scared anymore. She looked tired but resolute. My father is going to speak, Zoe said. Brittany's eyes went wide. She grabbed Trey's arm. Do something, she hissed. He is going to ruin the vibe. Trey looked at me across the room. He looked at Matteo sitting next to me, looking like a mob boss in his charcoal suit. Trey was paralyzed. He was trapped between the wife he feared and the father he had just realized was dangerous. He shook his head weakly. Zoe looked at me. She smiled. It was a watery smile, full of love and apology. Dad, she said into the mic, please. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. I adjusted my cuffs. I didn't rush. I walked across the marble floor with the slow, deliberate cadence of a man inspecting a foundation. The room went deadly silent. The guests sensed the tension. They had seen the confrontation earlier. They knew something was happening that wasn't on the program. I walked up the stairs to the stage. I took the microphone from my daughter's hand. I kissed her on the cheek. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," I whispered. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered back. I turned to face the room. The lights were bright, blinding me slightly, but I could see them. I could see the sea of faces, the influencers, the investors, the people who were there to be seen, not to celebrate. And right in the front, looking like they were waiting for a bomb to go off, were Trey and Brittany. I didn't take out a piece of paper. I didn't need notes. "Good evening," I said. My voice was deep, steady. It filled the cavernous room without shaking. "For those of you who don't know me, my name is Augustus Miller. I am the father of the bride. And I am the father of the groom." I paused. I let that sink in. "We talk a lot about family at weddings," I continued. "We talk about blood. We talk about legacy. We talk about how family is the most important thing in the world. And usually, we believe it. But tonight, I want to tell you a different story about family." Trey shifted in his seat. He was staring at his water glass, refusing to look at me. Brittany was glaring, her knuckles white as she gripped the stem of her wine glass. 6 years ago, on Thanksgiving Day, I put on my best suit, I said. I roasted a 20-pound turkey. I made my wife's famous sweet potato pie. I was ready to drive over to my son's house to share a meal. I was lonely. My wife had passed away, and the holidays were hard. I just wanted to sit at a table with my blood. The room was quiet, uncomfortably quiet. But 10 minutes before I left, my phone rang, I said. It was my son. He told me not to come. A gasp rippled through the room. A few people looked at Trey. He shrank into his chair. He told me that his wife had invited important people, I went on, my voice remaining calm, almost conversational. He told me that my presence would be a distraction. He said I was too old school. He said I didn't fit the aesthetic of their new life. He said I was an embarrassment. Brittany opened her mouth to protest, to shout, to do something, but the silence of the room crushed her. She couldn't make a scene now without looking like a monster. So I threw the turkey in the garbage, I said, and I drove to a restaurant. I sat alone in a booth, watching other families laugh and eat. I felt like a ghost. I felt like my life's work, raising a child, had been a failure. I looked toward the back of the room, toward table 15. But then, a stranger walked up to me, I said. A man I had never met. A man with rough hands and a loud voice. He saw an old man eating alone on a holiday. He didn't see a liability. He didn't see a bad aesthetic. He saw a human being. I pointed to the back corner. The spotlight followed my hand, illuminating Mateo Rivera and his family. He invited me to his table, I said. He shared his food with me. He let me fix his son's toy. He didn't ask me for money. He didn't ask me for connections. He just asked me to sit. I looked back at Trey. That night, my son sent me a text message, I said. He sent me a photo of his fancy dinner party. He captioned it, "Miss you, Dad. Sorry you were sick with the flu." Trey closed his eyes. I could see the shame burning him alive. The guests were whispering now, looking at him with open disgust. He lied to his guests, and he lied to himself, I said. But that night, while my son was erasing me, that stranger was saving me. I took a step forward. Over the last 6 years, that stranger became my partner. We built things together. We argued. We celebrated. We stood in the mud and the rain. He respected my mind, not my wallet. He respected my age, not my utility. I looked at Mateo. He gave me a thumbs up, his eyes shining. They say blood is thicker than water, I said, but I have learned that is not always true. Sometimes, the bond of respect is stronger than the bond of DNA. Sometimes, your real family are the people who stand by you when you have nothing to offer but your company. I turned to Trey. You wanted a legacy, son. You wanted success. But you forgot that you can't build a skyscraper on a foundation of lies. You forgot that the way you treat people on your way up is exactly how they will treat you on your way down. Then, I turned to Zoe. My beautiful daughter, I said, my voice softening. You are the innocent heart in this story. You just wanted to marry the man you love. You didn't care about the aesthetic. You didn't care about the money. You just wanted your dad to be there. Zoe was crying. Julian was holding her hand tight. You were worried about the cost of this wedding, I said. You were worried about the debt. You were worried about the grand pavilion and the ruthless owner who would demand payment. I reached into my inside pocket. I pulled out a thick, legal envelope. Well, I have some news for you, Zoe, I said. I know the owner. I know him very well. I looked at Brittany. She was staring at the envelope, her face pale. Brittany told you that I was a senile old man, I said. She told you I spent my days playing checkers in the park. She told you I was broke. I laughed. It was a rich, hearty sound. I am not broke, I said, and I don't play checkers. I play chess. I opened the envelope. I pulled out a deed. It was stamped with the city seal. I handed it to Zoe. The owner of this building isn't a shark, Zoe, I said. The owner is M&G Construction. I paused. M stands for Mateo, and G stands for Gus. The room erupted. It wasn't just a gasp. It was a shock wave. People stood up. Whispers turned into shouts. I own this building, I said, my voice booming over the chaos. I built it. Every beam, every glass panel, every marble tile. I looked at Brittany. Her eyes were bulging. Her mouth was open in a silent scream of realization. And today, I said, looking at Zoe, I am not paying the bill for your wedding. Zoe looked at the paper in her hands. She read the lines. She realized what she was holding. Dad? She whispered. Because today, I said, smiling, I am giving you the building. I gestured to the soaring glass roof. This is your wedding gift, Zoe. The grand pavilion, the land, the structure, the business. It is all yours. Crash. The sound of shattering glass cut through the noise. Brittany had dropped her wine glass. Red wine splashed across her silver sequin dress, staining it like blood. But she didn't move. She didn't look down. She was staring at me with a look of pure, unadulterated horror. She realized, in that split second, that she had spent months trying to impress the owner of the venue, only to realize she had put him at table 15. She realized she had called the multi-millionaire landlord a stray and hidden him behind a pillar. I looked at her. Happy wedding day, Brittany, I said into the microphone. I hope the aesthetic was worth it. I dropped the mic. It hit the floor with a thud that echoed like a gavel. I walked off the stage. I didn't look at Trey. I didn't look at Brittany. I walked straight to my daughter, who was sobbing with joy, and I hugged her. And from the back of the room, above the applause and the shock, I heard Mateo's voice. That is my pop, he shouted. That is my pop. The empire had been revealed. The lesson had been taught. And the look on Brittany's face? That was worth more than any building in the world. The echo of the microphone hitting the floor was still ringing in the air when my son finally snapped. It was not a dignified break. It was the shattering of a man whose entire reality had just been revealed as a hallucination. Trey stood up, his chair scraping violently against the marble floor. His face was a deep, mottled red, the veins in his neck bulging against the collar of his shirt. He looked at me, then at the deed in Zoe's hand, then back at me. He was shaking, vibrating with a mix of humiliation and disbelief. "You are lying," Trey screamed. His voice cracked, high and hysterical, echoing off the glass walls I had built. He pointed a trembling finger at me. "This is a joke. This is some sick, twisted prank. You are a liar." He looked around the room, desperate for allies, desperate for someone to validate his version of the world. "Look at him," Trey shouted to the stunned guests. "Look at his clothes. Look at his shoes. He is a retiree. He clips coupons. He lives in a house with peeling wallpaper. He doesn't have 2 nickels to rub together." He turned to Brittany, begging her to fix it. "Tell them, Brittany. Tell them he begged us for $5,000 last week. Tell them we had to give him charity." Brittany didn't say a word. She was staring at Mateo Rivera, who was sipping his wine with a look of supreme satisfaction. She was staring at Mr. Henderson, the general manager, who was still standing respectfully by the stage. The gears in her head were turning, grinding against the rusted reality of her own arrogance. She knew. Deep down she knew. But Trey was too far gone. He marched toward me. He stopped at the base of the stage, looking up at me with wild eyes. "Where did you get that paper?" Trey demanded. "Did you print it off the internet? Did you forge it? That is fraud, Dad. I will have you arrested. You can't just walk in here and claim you own the Grand Pavilion. This place is worth $20 million. You are a poor old man." I looked down at him. I didn't feel anger anymore. I just felt a profound, heavy pity. He was arguing with gravity. He was screaming at the tide to stop coming in. I didn't answer him. I didn't have to. From the shadows of table 15, a figure emerged. It wasn't Mateo this time. It was a man in a gray suit, carrying a slim leather briefcase. He walked with the quiet precision of a surgeon. He had been sitting with the Rivera family the whole time, unnoticed, just another face in the corner. This was Mr. Sterling, my corporate attorney, the man who buried the bodies, legally speaking. Mr. Sterling walked up to Trey. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look emotional. He simply opened his briefcase and pulled out a binder. "Mr. Miller," Mr. Sterling said, his voice dry and crisp, "I suggest you lower your voice. You are disturbing the shareholders." "Who are you?" Trey spat. "Another one of his drinking buddies?" "I am the general counsel for M&G Construction," Mr. Sterling said. "And I am the personal attorney for Augustus Miller." He handed a document to Trey. Trey snatched it. "This is the Articles of Incorporation for the holding company that owns this venue," Mr. Sterling explained calmly. "As you can see, the ownership structure is split. 51% is held by Mr. Mateo Rivera. 49% is held by Mr. Augustus Miller." Trey stared at the paper. His eyes darted back and forth. "But," Trey stammered, "but minority ownership, that doesn't mean he controls it." "Read paragraph 4, Mr. Sterling said. Trey read it. I saw his lips moving. "The minority shareholder, Augustus Miller, retains absolute executive veto power over all asset acquisitions, liquidations, and major capital expenditures. Furthermore, Augustus Miller is designated as the silent chairman, with full authority to dissolve the board." Mr. Sterling pulled out another document. "And this," he continued, "is the transfer of deed, executed this morning, notarized, filed with the county clerk at 9 a.m. Mr. Miller has legally transferred the title of the Grand Pavilion, free and clear of all liens, to his daughter, Zoe Miller." Mr. Sterling adjusted his glasses. "It is ironclad, Mr. Miller. Your father didn't just print a piece of paper. He just gave away an asset worth $25 million, and he did it without touching his principal." Trey dropped the papers. They fluttered to the floor, landing in the pool of red wine that Brittany had spilled. $25 million, Trey whispered. He looked up at me. His eyes were wide, vacant. He looked like a child who had just found out Santa Claus was real. But that Santa Claus hated him. "You had $25 million? Trey asked, his voice barely audible. "I have significantly more than that, son," I said gently. "Then why?" Trey screamed, the tears finally bursting forth. "Why did you live like that? Why did you drive that car? Why did you let us think you were poor?" "Because I wanted to see who you were," I said. "I wanted to see if you would love me without the money, and you gave me my answer." Trey fell to his knees. It wasn't a theatrical gesture. His legs just gave out. He knelt in the wine and the spilled papers, sobbing. But then, a voice cut through the sobbing. "Wait." It was Julian, Zoe's fiancé, or rather, her husband now. Julian stepped forward. He wasn't looking at Trey. He wasn't looking at the deed. He was looking at me with an expression of intense, dawning recognition. He walked past Zoe, past the crying groom, and stood at the bottom of the stairs. He looked up at me, squinting slightly under the stage lights. "Mr. Miller?" Julian asked. "Yes, Julian?" "Last week," Julian said, his voice trembling. "My company. We lost our funding. We were dead in the water. I was going to have to lay off 50 people." I nodded. "I remember." "Then, on Tuesday," Julian continued, stepping closer, "we got an email, an angel investor, an anonymous entity called the Architect Trust. They wired us $2 million. No pitch meeting, no diligence, just a note that said, 'Build something that lasts.'" Julian looked at Mateo, then back at me. "The Architect Trust," Julian whispered. "That is you, isn't it?" I smiled. "I read your code, Julian," I said. "I don't know much about apps, but I know about structure. Your back-end architecture is solid. You built a strong foundation. You just needed materials." Julian put his hand over his mouth. Tears welled up in his eyes. "You saved us," he choked out. "You saved my company. You saved my employees. And you didn't even tell me." "I didn't do it for credit," I said. "I did it because you are a builder, and builders help builders." The room was absolutely silent. The contrast was so sharp it cut like a knife. On the floor, kneeling in a puddle of wine, was my son. The son who had asked for money to gamble on crypto, who had tried to put me in a home to steal my house, who had uninvited me to Thanksgiving. I had given him $5,000 and a hard lesson. Standing in front of me was my son-in-law, a man who had never asked me for a dime, a man who loved my daughter when she was broke, a man who worked double shifts to pay for a wedding he couldn't afford. I had given him $2 million and a future. Trey looked up. He heard it. He understood it. "You gave him $2 million?" Trey rasped. "He is a stranger. I am your son." I looked down at Trey. "He is not a stranger, Trey," I said. "He is family. Because he knows how to treat people." I pointed to Julian. "He invited me to sit in the front row," I said. "He asked for my blessing, not my bank account. He respected me when I was wearing a flannel shirt. You couldn't even respect me when I was wearing a suit." I looked at Brittany. She was standing by the table, shaking. She realized now that the man she had mocked, the man she had tried to hide, held the mortgage on her entire social status. "Brittany," I said. She jumped. "Yes? Yes, Gus? Or Mr. Miller?" I looked at the invoice Mateo had sent her, the one marked paid. "You worried so much about the cost of a plate," I said. "You worried about the aesthetic. Well, consider the debt paid. The wedding is free." Brittany let out a sob of relief. "Oh, thank you. Thank you, Gus. But," I added, my voice turning cold, "the building now belongs to Zoe, which means she is your landlord." I looked at Zoe. She was holding the deed, looking from me to Brittany. A new strength was rising in her eyes. "Zoe," I said, "it is your house. You decide who stays." Zoe looked at Brittany. She looked at the years of bullying, the years of snide comments, the hijacking of her wedding. She stepped forward. "Brittany," Zoe said, her voice calm, "get out." "What?" Brittany gasped. "Get out of my venue," Zoe said. "You and your influencers, you and your cameras. Leave." "But the reception," Brittany cried. "The dinner. Take it to a food truck," Zoe said. "Security," Mateo shouted from the back. 4 large men in black suits materialized from the shadows. They weren't venue security. They were M&G guys. "Escort Mrs. Miller out," Mateo ordered, "and anyone who is with her." Trey stood up. He looked at me, begging. "Dad, what about me?" I looked at him. I looked at the man who had left me alone on Thanksgiving. "You can stay, Trey," I said. Trey exhaled. "Thank God." "But," I continued, "you are sitting at table 15. Trey froze. "It is a good table," I said, repeating his words back to him. "It is quiet. You can relax. And when the photographer comes around, maybe just look down at your plate." I turned my back on him. I walked down the stairs to my real family. Julian hugged me. Zoe hugged me. Mateo handed me a glass of wine. Behind me, I heard Brittany screaming as she was dragged out. I heard Trey shuffling slowly, painfully, toward the dark corner behind the pillar. The music started. It was a jazz song, smooth, complex, and timeless. I took a sip of wine. The assets had been revealed. The accounts had been balanced. And for the first time in a long time, the ledger was perfect. The silence in the ballroom was not empty. It was heavy. It was the kind of silence that has weight and mass pressing down on the shoulders of the guilty. I stood at the base of the stage, my hand resting on my daughter's shoulder, feeling the tremors of shock still running through her. The deed to the building was in her hand, a piece of paper that weighed less than an ounce, but carried the force of a wrecking ball. Trey was the first to move. He didn't walk away in shame. He didn't apologize. He did something that only a man drowning in his own delusion would do. He tried to rewrite history in real time. He wiped the wine off his knees. He straightened his tie, which was now crooked and stained. He put on a smile that was terrifying in its falseness. It was a smile that didn't reach his eyes, a smile that was purely a survival mechanism. He walked toward me, his hands open, palms up, the universal gesture of a man asking for mercy while pretending he is offering a gift. "Dad," he said, his voice shaking but gaining volume. "Dad, wait. I see what you were doing." He laughed. It was a brittle, cracking sound. "You really got us, Dad. You really got us." He looked around at the guests, trying to pull them into his delusion. "Don't you see, everyone?" he announced, gesturing to me. This was a test. This was all a test. My father, he is a genius. He is a brilliant teacher. He walked right up to me, ignoring the wall of security guards that Mateo had signaled to stand down for just a moment. Trey looked me in the eye, and the desperation coming off him smelled like sour sweat. "I knew it, Dad." Trey whispered loud enough for Zoe to hear. I knew you weren't senile. I knew you had millions hidden away. But I knew that if I was nice to you, if I coddled you, you would just sit on it. You would rust. He nodded, nodding so hard his hair flopped over his forehead. So, I pushed you. I had to be the villain, Dad. Don't you see? I had to treat you like that to wake you up. I had to make you angry so you would go out and build something. I did this for you. I sacrificed my reputation to reignite your fire. I stared at him. I stared at the creature I had raised. He was twisting his cruelty into benevolence. He was taking his greed and painting it as tough love. It was the most pathetic display I had ever witnessed. You did this for me, I asked, my voice flat. Yes, Trey said eagerly, sensing a crack in the door. I wanted the old Gus back. And look, it worked. You built an empire. You saved the day. We are a team, Dad. You the builder, me the motivator. Before I could answer, Brittany shoved him aside. She had recovered from her shock. The calculator behind her eyes had rebooted. She realized that Trey's strategy was risky, but her strategy had always been charm. Or at least, what she thought was charm. She walked up to me, ignoring the wine stain on her dress. She put her hand on my arm, the same arm she had wiped sanitizer off of 6 months ago. Oh, Gus, stop it, she said, crying fake tears. Trey is an idiot, but he means well. But me? You know I love you. She squeezed my arm. The table thing? The seating chart? That wasn't because I was ashamed of you, Gus. It was because I was protecting you. I knew these people, these influencers. They are vultures. I didn't want them to bother you. I wanted you to have peace. She looked at the deed in Zoe's hand. And this building? Oh, Gus, it is magnificent. You have such taste. I have always said that. Haven't I, Trey? I have always said your father has impeccable taste. She leaned in closer, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. We can fix this, Gus. We can be a power family. You, me, Trey, and Zoe. We can run this city. You need someone to manage the PR for M&G Construction, right? I can do that. I can rebrand us. We can forget all this unpleasantness. We can just be family. I looked at her hand on my sleeve. I looked at Trey's hopeful, desperate face. They were shapeshifters. They would be whatever I wanted them to be, as long as the check cleared. If I wanted them to be humble, they would kneel. If I wanted them to be proud, they would strut. They had no spine, no core, no soul. They were just appetites, wrapped in expensive clothes. I gently removed Brittany's hand from my arm. I brushed the spot where she had touched me as if brushing away dust. I looked at Trey. 6 years ago, I said, my voice projecting to the back of the room. You told me not to come to Thanksgiving. You said I didn't fit the aesthetic. That was a mistake, Trey stammered. No, I said. It was a choice. You chose a table that didn't have a seat for me. I looked at Brittany. And you chose a wedding that didn't have a seat for my friends. I took a step back, creating a physical distance between us that felt like an ocean. You say you want to be family, I said. You say you want to run this city together. I reached into my tuxedo pocket. I pulled out a fountain pen, the gold one I had used to sign the contracts for the skyscrapers. I turned to Mr. Sterling, my lawyer, who was standing ready. The will, I said. Mr. Sterling opened his briefcase. He pulled out a document bound in blue paper. Trey's eyes lit up. He thought I was going to sign him back in. He thought I was going to rewrite the terms. I took the document. This is my last will and testament, I said, holding it up. Trey smiled. See, he loves us. Until this morning, I continued. Trey, you were the primary beneficiary. You were set to inherit the house, the land, and the remaining liquid assets. Trey let out a breath he had been holding. Thank you, Dad. I knew you wouldn't abandon me. But I said, and the word hung in the air like a guillotine blade. I learned something today. I learned that inheritance is not a right. It is a trust, and you have broken that trust. I uncapped the pen. I crossed out a name, a single thick line of black ink, Trey Miller. Then I wrote in a new name. What are you doing? Trey whispered, the color draining from his face. Dad, what are you writing? I looked at him. I am leaving my share of M&G Construction, I said, my voice ringing with finality, to the Mateo Rivera Foundation for Urban Development. Trey gasped. A charity? You are giving my money to a charity? It is not your money, I snapped. It never was. It is my sweat. It is my time. And it is going to go to people who will build homes for the poor, not buy Porsches for the vain. I looked at Zoe. And the remainder of the estate, I said, the cash, the bonds, the house, it goes to Zoe Miller. No! Brittany screamed. She lost her composure completely. She lunged at me. You can't do that. That is millions of dollars. You are stealing from us. Security, Mateo said, calm but loud. The four men in black suits stepped forward. They didn't ask nicely. They grabbed Trey by the arms. They grabbed Brittany. Get your hands off me, Brittany shrieked, kicking and scratching. Do you know who I am? I am Mrs. Miller. You are a trespasser, Mateo said, stepping in front of me to shield me. And you are disturbing the owner. Trey looked at me as he was being dragged backward. His heels were skidding on the marble floor. He looked like a man being dragged to the gallows. Dad, Trey screamed. Dad, please, I am your son. You can't leave me with nothing. I have debt, Dad. I have so much debt. I looked at him one last time. You have your aesthetic son, I said. I hope it keeps you warm. Take them out, Mateo ordered. The guards dragged them toward the main doors. The guests parted like the Red Sea, watching in horrified fascination. Phones were out recording every second. The live stream that Brittany had set up to broadcast her triumph was now broadcasting her absolute destruction to the world. I watched them go. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a quiet resolve. I had cauterized the wound. It hurt, but it would heal. The doors slammed shut behind them. But the show wasn't over. Through the glass walls of the lobby, we could all see the scene unfolding on the driveway. The valet had brought their car. It wasn't the Escalade, it was Trey's Porsche. Brittany broke free from the guards. She didn't run to the car. She turned on Trey. We could hear her screaming, even through the glass. She was hitting him. She was swinging her expensive handbag, beating him on the chest and shoulders. You idiot, she screamed, her face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. You told me he was senile. You told me he was broke. You lost us $25 million. Trey tried to defend himself, holding up his hands, but she was relentless. I am leaving you, Brittany shrieked. Do you hear me? I am filing for divorce tonight. You are nothing. You are a broke loser with a broke father. She threw her ring at him. It bounced off his chest and rolled into the gutter. She turned and hailed a taxi that was dropping off late guests. She got in and slammed the door, leaving Trey standing alone on the pavement under the streetlights. He looked at the closed doors of the Grand Pavilion. He looked at the party going on inside. He looked at the life he had been born into, and the life he had just thrown away. He slumped against his car and slid down to the ground, burying his face in his hands. Inside the ballroom, the silence stretched out. Then Mateo clapped his hand on my shoulder. He is gone, Pops, Mateo said softly. I nodded. I turned to the band. Play something cheerful, I said. This is a wedding, and my daughter needs to dance. The band struck up a tune. The tension broke. The guests, seeing that the chairman was smiling, began to relax. I walked over to Zoe. She was hugging Julian, crying happy tears. May I have this dance, Mrs. Miller? I asked, bowing slightly. She laughed a sound like bells. Yes, Dad, you may. We walked to the dance floor. As we spun around under the glass roof I had built, I looked up at the stars. I had lost a son that night. It was true. But as I looked at Mateo toasting me from the table, as I looked at Julian holding my daughter, as I looked at the joy in the room, I realized the truth. I hadn't lost a family. I had finally found one. The best part of a wedding is not the ceremony, with its scripted vows and stiff posture. It is not the dinner with the clinking silverware and polite conversation. The best part is the hour after the party officially ends. The hour when the DJ has packed up his speakers, the influencers have gone home to edit their photos, and the shoes finally come off. The Grand Pavilion was quiet now. The staff was sweeping the confetti from the marble floor, moving with the rhythmic swish of brooms that sounded like ocean waves. The lights had been dimmed to a warm, amber glow. The main doors were locked, shutting out the world, shutting out the drama, shutting out the son who was likely still sitting in his car, wondering where it all went wrong. We had pushed 3 tables together in the center of the room. It was no longer table 15 in the shadows. It was the heart of the building. I sat at the head of this makeshift banquet. To my right sat Mateo, his tie undone, his jacket draped over the back of his chair. He was laughing, a deep, rumbling sound that shook the table. To my left sat Zoe, my beautiful daughter. She had kicked off her high heels and was sitting cross-legged on the chair, leaning her head on Julian's shoulder. Across from us were Maria, holding a sleeping toddler, and Abuela, who was currently teaching the venue's head chef how to properly wrap leftovers. I swirled the wine in my glass. It was the last of the vintage Bordeaux. It tasted of earth and history. Zoe reached out and took my hand. Her palm was warm. "Dad," she said softly. The room went quiet. Mateo stopped laughing. Maria looked over. "I didn't know," Zoe whispered. "I didn't know you were so lonely. I didn't know Trey had cut you out like that." I squeezed her hand. "I wasn't lonely, sweetheart," I said. "Not for long." I looked at Mateo. "I found shelter," I said. "I found a roof when mine was leaking." Zoe looked at Mateo, her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she said to him. "Thank you for being the brother he deserved. Thank you for saving him." Mateo smiled. He didn't brush it off with a joke this time. He looked serious. "He saved me, Zoe," Mateo said. "I was a contractor with a truck and a lot of debt. He gave me the blueprints. He gave me the confidence. We saved each other." Abuela walked over to the table. She placed a small plate of wedding cake in front of me. She tapped the table with her finger. "Eat," she commanded. "You are too thin." We all laughed. It was a genuine, healing sound. It bounced off the glass walls and filled the empty space where the pretension used to be. I looked around the table. I looked at Julian, who was talking to Leo about coding. I looked at Sophia, showing Maria pictures on her phone. I looked at this mismatched, chaotic, beautiful group of people. And then my eyes drifted to the empty chair next to me. It was the chair I had instinctively left open. For years, in my mind, that chair had been reserved. It was reserved for the memory of my wife, Beatrice. And, in a darker corner of my heart, it had been reserved for Trey. I had kept it open, hoping that one day he would walk through the door, apologize, and sit down. I had kept it open because a father never truly gives up on his child, even when he should. But tonight, looking at that empty chair, I felt something shift. The emptiness wasn't heavy anymore. It wasn't a void waiting to be filled. It was just space. I realized that I didn't need Trey to sit there to make the table complete. I didn't need his validation to be a patriarch. I didn't need his aesthetic to be happy. The chair was empty, but my cup was full. I took a sip of wine and let the realization settle in my bones. I had spent so much time grieving the family I thought I was supposed to have, the bloodline, the name, the tradition, that I almost missed the family I actually had, the family that chose me. I looked at Mateo. He caught my eye. He always knew what I was thinking. He reached under the table and pulled out a long cardboard tube, the familiar canister of blueprints. "You tired, Pops?" Mateo asked. I smiled. "I am never that tired." "What is next?" Julian asked, leaning forward with interest. "Another skyscraper? A stadium?" Mateo uncapped the tube. He slid the papers out onto the tablecloth, pushing aside the crystal wine glasses and the remnants of the cake. He weighted the corners down with forks. "Not a skyscraper," I said. We all looked at the drawing. It wasn't a towering monolith of glass and steel. It was something different. It was low, wide, and welcoming. It had gardens. It had open courtyards. It had large windows designed to let in natural light. "This," I said, tracing the lines with my finger, "is the next project." Zoe squinted at the title block. "The Beatrice Miller Community Center," she read aloud. She looked up at me, her hand flying to her mouth. "Mom?" I nodded. "It is not for profit," I explained. "It is for people. It is a place for the seniors in this city who have been forgotten, the ones whose families are too busy, the ones who eat dinner alone on holidays." I pointed to the different sections. "Here is a cafeteria that serves hot meals 3 times a day, free of charge. Real food, not cafeteria slop. Food like Abuela makes." Abuela nodded approvingly at the mention of food. "Here is a workshop," I continued, "for retired tradesmen who still want to work with their hands, but can't handle the heavy lifting anymore. They can teach the younger generation. They can fix toys. They can build furniture. And here," Mateo added, pointing to a large wing, "this is the medical center. Free checkups, no insurance needed. funded entirely by the profits from the Grand Pavilion. Zoe started to cry again, but these were happy tears. "Dad," she said, "it is beautiful. It is necessary," I said. I looked at the drawing. I saw the future. I saw a place where no one would ever have to feel the way I felt that Thanksgiving. I saw a place where dignity wasn't determined by your net worth or your aesthetic. "You are going to build this?" Julian asked. "We are going to build it," I said, looking at Mateo. "And we are going to build it right. Copper pipes, reinforced foundation. It will stand for 100 years. Mateo rolled up the blueprints. "We break ground on Monday," he said. I sat back in my chair. The fatigue of the day finally started to wash over me, but it was a good fatigue, the kind that comes after a hard day's work. I looked out the glass walls of the venue. The city lights were twinkling in the distance. Somewhere out there, Trey was probably sitting in a hotel room, blaming the world for his misfortune. I hoped, for his sake, that he would eventually find his way. I hoped he would learn to build his own life instead of trying to steal mine. But I couldn't build it for him. I had to let him go. I stood up. My knees popped, but I felt strong. I picked up my glass. "To the future," I said. "To the future," they all echoed. We drank. I walked over to the window. I looked at my reflection in the glass. I didn't see a lonely old man. I didn't see a victim. I saw Augustus Miller, father, builder, survivor. I adjusted my tie. I turned back to the room filled with laughter and love. I was ready to go home. Not to the empty house with the peeling wallpaper, but to the feeling of home that I carried with me now. I walked toward the exit, my arm linked with Mateo's. We walked out into the cool night air, leaving the empty chair behind us. The night was dark, but the stars were bright. And tomorrow, we had concrete to pour. They say blood is thicker than water, but sometimes water is the only thing that washes away the pain inflicted by your own blood. My son pushed me away to please a wife who despised my existence, leaving me to face the holidays alone. But in that solitude, I found strangers who became my shelter. I learned that family isn't a birthright. It's a title you earn every single day through love, respect, and kindness. Don't hold on to a toxic branch just because it's part of your tree. Sometimes you have to plant a new forest to finally find your shade. If this story touched your heart, and if you believe that true family is built on love and not just DNA, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. It helps us share more stories of resilience and justice. And I want to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever found family in an unexpected place? Share your story below. I read every single one. Until next time, keep building your own legacy. Stay strong.